Hello and welcome. Oh, I'm gonna do that again. Actually, sorry, because I just adjusted my mic as I did that, so that's gonna sound fucking awful. So let me try that again. I am a professional, I promise. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, a podcast where I definitely haven't just had to start it twice because I adjusted the mic while I said hello. I'm a professional. I'm very good at this. I've done it for 10 years now, Chris. Yeah.
I would say adequate.
Yeah. That's a
Not
good
very,
word.
very good. But give us another 10 years, Dan, and we'll be all right. Right now, firmly adequate, baby.
I'll take adequate, to be honest with you, because genuinely, if you were actually to ask me how good I think we are at this, I'd feel like adequate was an upgrade from my actual thoughts.
You know how bad we are at this. This is obviously a trilogy that might well attract new listeners. And the first thing we do is talk about how shit we are at this.
God, that is true. Should we start again? Right, let me just pretend that didn't happen. It's fine, don't worry about it. None of that. Okay, right. Professionalism, Chris. You ready for professionalism?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Nothing But Static. No, rewind. Oh, fuck, I did it wrong. How did I do it wrong? Let me try.
Nice.
Right, no, this is all gone. Don't worry about this. Ignore this too. Ignore this too. Ignore this too. Okay. Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, a podcast where we review old movies from our past. This week we're doing Lord of the Rings. We're doing the first of the trilogy. The next 3 weeks we're going to be doing all the Lord of the Rings films. Not all of the Lord of the Rings films. We're not touching those Hobbit movies. Not yet, anyway.
Or indeed the animated Lord of the Rings films.
Oh yeah, the Bakshi ones. Yes.
The Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy starting this week with the Fellowship of the Rings.
Yeah, we're not touching Ralph Bakshi. Although I bet Ralph Bakshi's version of Lord of the Rings probably is all right. I haven't gone back.
I don't know. I'll see. What confused me was because I did look on I wondered who came back for The Hobbit after watching this. So I did see I did look on Wikipedia, and as far as I can tell, there's an animated Lord of the Rings, and then there's an animated Return of the King. So I don't know if the Two Towers is just sort of embedded into those, or really
I think so.
I
believe so. It's just spread across 2 movies instead of 3. But yeah. Apparently, though, not to get straight into movie chat, Chris, because intentionally to do that because we're professionals and we're good at this. For any new listeners, we're good at this. I'm just going to keep saying that and make it maybe if I wish it into existence, I'm gonna materialize us being good podcasters through the power of thought. Look, Peter Jackson has said that the Bakshi movies, the 97 Lord of the Rings film, did inspire a certain amount of the visual style.
that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's fair. I mean, I've looked at that film. I know these days it's looked upon as like quite a quaint little attempt to recreate it, but I think the visual style and the approach to sort of realizing the works of Tolkien visually, I think there's a lot of groundwork laid in that animated movie. Maybe at one point we will watch that, for this. Styling-wise, approach. I don't know. I definitely feel like Jackson would have been stupid to ignore the animated movie, to be honest.
Yeah, but by this, do you mean for one of the Lord of the Rings episodes, or do you mean for Rewind Reviews?
Oh, no, just at some point in Rewind Reviews, not for specifically this trilogy.
I was going to say, we're doing the extended Bad Boys. We don't need to add another...
No, I just meant at some point, in the distant future, maybe what we'll do is we'll do the Hobbit trilogy followed by the Bakshi Lord of the Rings or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's different things we can do with it. But I remember seeing that animated movie as a kid and being reasonably impressed. But I've only ever seen it that once, I think, and I don't think I ever saw the second or whatever. I think the story ended early. I think it ends before the ring goes in Mordor, and I don't think I saw what followed. So, if anything followed at all, for all we know, it got cancelled there, and there isn't a second movie, and that's what it is. Maybe it's half a movie. I honestly don't remember. I genuinely don't remember, but we'll come back to that. But anyway, so this week we're looking at the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies from what year? God. I actually don't know what year these came out. 2001? 2001.
2001, yeah. So we tend to start on this podcast by talking about our personal experiences with it. What's yours, Dan? What did you see these in the cinema? Were you big? Were you firmly on the Lord of the Rings train? What's your history?
So I think this is an interesting one for me because I think when this came out, for some reason, it very quickly on the schoolyard became Star Wars versus Lord of the Rings. Very quickly, and I don't know why. And it might just be a very personal experience. Maybe that was reflective of the wider cultural conversation, about what the big sort of fantasy science fiction franchise, what the superior franchise was, maybe. I don't know if that was a wider thing or just amongst the people I was engaging with at school. I don't know. But it very quickly became
it's a big... One... I think that might have been a sort of cultural thing, because it's obviously that's talked about quite a bit in like Clerks 2 and stuff like that from
it is
Kevin Smith. So I think maybe that is that. I don't think it was just your school, certainly.
Interesting. Well, basically, so I stuck my nose up at the first one when it came out for that very reason, because I was a snotty little child, and quite frankly, if you're telling me that Star Wars is being usurped by some fucking elves, I wasn't having it. Give me my laser swords, I said. So I staunchly refused to watch the first one on release in cinemas. And caught it in the build-up to the second one's release. I assume on DVD. But it was the theatrical cut I saw first. There was no way you were going to convince me to watch one that was half an hour longer. But I remember people were so excited as The Two Towers was on its way that even though the year before I'd been like, I'm not going to watch it, I started to get a little bit like intrigued at why everyone was so excited. And I remember digging out or renting or whatever I did, or borrowing maybe from a friend at school, the theatrical cut of this movie, Fellowship, and sitting down to watch it, getting a few minutes in, being like, I don't know, and then like pausing it, getting distracted, not going back to it for maybe a week or two, and then finally putting it on, getting a few more minutes in, and getting quite hooked, and starting to get like quite interested in the world and interested in the characters, and because I don't think I'd read any of the books when I saw this movie. Presumably in around 2002, when it was out on video. So I watched it that way. Really kind of got fascinated by the world. Then I obviously saw The Two Towers in cinemas, because why not? And then I think I went and dug out the books, because I was like, right, I'm into this now. So I read The Hobbit. Absolutely love The Hobbit. Love The Hobbit so much. Really excitedly crack open The Lord of the Rings, and got very, very confused and bored very quickly, put it down, and really struggled to get through it. And it took me years and years and years to ever finish those Lord of the Rings books. I'm more of a fan.
Dan read a page a day for the next 10 years.
Honestly, it might as well have been. It was a lot of false starts, going back, reading chapters again, figuring it out, just working my way through it, like forcing myself. I am not a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings books. I think they're needlessly bogged down in lore. When the characters are so good and interesting, I like them to be more of the focus, and I feel like that sometimes it gets lost in its own history, the world, whereas The Hobbit is a bit more character focused and a bit more just adventure focused, and the wider world is hinted at but not really elaborated on. And then Tolkien, and obviously The Hobbit's like for children and it's like a fun children adventure, and then he went to war. Tolkien saw a lot of death and a lot of tragedy, came back and wrote Lord of the Rings, which has, in the second one, a swamp full of bodies, which is supposedly an image he really saw at war. So he came back and wrote this fucking miserable epic, which is an incredible feat. Don't get me wrong. I think the Lord of the Rings books are an absolute masterpiece of world building and storytelling, for sure. But for me and my personal tastes, I prefer a little bit more of a focus on characters in that world and let the world building come to me through them, rather than here's your glossary. We're now going to spend 3 pages explaining the history of this particular race. We're now going to spend 10 pages going into the backstory of this. So yeah, I'm a real big fan of the Hobbit book. Not a huge fan of Lord of the Rings books, but I respect them deeply, and I've only ever read them, I think, maybe the once in total, all the way through. And then the films, yeah, I've got a real fondness for, because the films got me into them altogether. So yeah, that's kind of my history with the franchise in general. But I got the extended cuts, which I then very much sort of replaced the theatricals for me. I don't think I saw the extended cuts till after Return of the King came out, when I got that green box set everyone had. That's all 3 extended cuts, and that's when I first watched all the extendeds. And I've never I don't think I've gone back to the theatricals since, because the extendeds are paced better, smoother, more enjoyable for me, to memory. So yeah, that's kind of my history with it. Nice. It's a bit of a complicated one, because the reality is my history with this film is also my history with the franchise in general. So I guess next week I will have to take 5 minutes at the top of the podcast to explain that.
Oh yeah, no, same, and that's completely. That's the case for me, because, well, especially given the way in which I watched this first one. Dan, there was a girl who I wanted to date, and I believe was dating one of my early relationships, but not really like a proper, well, that sounds really bad. It's one of those, you say your boyfriend and girlfriend thing, and you go on dates and you hold hands at lunchtime sort of thing. And she wanted to go see The Two Towers at the cinema, which meant it was one of our earliest dates, which meant this fella had to watch The Fellowship of the Ring on video. And those people those of you out there that listen to Rewind reviews and engage with Nothing But Static will know that things like this, things like Game of Thrones, etc., I enjoy, but they aren't necessarily my go-to. They're not my jam, as we like to say. So you can imagine, like, 12, 13-year-old me, however old I was, just not really, I think on reflection, probably not paying attention. It's kind of your experience with the books was my experience with the film on video. I remember literally going up one night, putting the VHS in, I think the day before we were going to go see The Two Towers, and just being like, okay, I guess I've got to watch this. I don't really know what's going on. I'm not really understanding it. And I suspect not understanding it because I wasn't giving it the attention I should have been giving to it, and went in with I'm not going to understand this attitude, because I was 12, 13, however old I was. I think 13, 2001. No, this would have been 2002 when The Two Towers came out. So yeah, I'd have been 13 years old, and then saw the Two Towers, and spent most of the film thinking about. Because at this point we hadn't been this was a really early date, and at this point we hadn't held hands, let alone kissed or anything. And I spent most of the film plucking up the courage to hold her hand and just reach out and grab it. And I'm talking to myself, and then orcs and shit's happening, but mainly in my head I'm going, right, just reach out and grab her hand, it'll be fine. Just reach out and do it. Like, I was a very nervous 13-year-old boy, and eventually, Dan, I gathered the courage to hold her hand, and I was going to reach out and do it, and the massive battle at the end of The Two Towers started, and I was like, well, I can't do it now, I'll just look scared. So didn't hold her hand, and then by the third film we were no longer dating. And I didn't see it for, I think, a year or two. And then I borrowed the VHS off of another girlfriend because I was quite the player. And she was like, well, you've seen the first two, you might as well watch this one. And I took it, and my memory is I remember enjoying that one the most out of the 3 films. But still not really understanding it, not paying the attention it deserved, and then never going back. And I brought it was the theatrical cuts recently. I think last year, one of those things where relatives were asking for my wish list for Christmas, and I put the Lord of the Rings, the theatrical versions, the box set on there, and someone brought it for me. Sorry, I know I probably got that. I'm conscious that I always get that the wrong way around. Bought and brought. Someone purchased it for me. Gave it to me as a gift, and I made note to watch it, but then I think then there was kind of a logic of... It's similar. I've got Indiana Jones as well. There's kind of a logic of at some point we'll probably do these for rewind reviews. Yes. So I never got around to watching them. But my point is, for the last couple of years, I have had that intention of I should give these movies another go as an adult, paying them the due attention that they're deserving of, and seeing if I can get a bit more into them and enjoy them a bit more. So that was kind of my viewpoint going into this. For those that are new, we do a kind of very broad would we recommend it. That's usually so that if people haven't seen the film, they can sort of pause and watch it or not watch it.
Yeah, there's like a spoiler-free bit up front, and then we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the story.
I mean, less need here, obviously. It's one of the biggest film franchises of all time. And obviously, I think it's fairly obvious that we would, of course, recommend people watch this movie. I'm fairly confident you would say the same, Dan.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, it's a incredible theatrical feat. There's loads of epic scenes. I think we would recommend it. If for some reason you've not watched Lord of the Rings and you're debating pausing this, obviously pause this, come back. We're going into spoilers and general discussion right away now. I think an interesting discussion starting point, if I may, Dan, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
I think this really, even this extended version, and I don't have enough memory of the theatrical or clearly paid enough attention to compare.
To be fair, I thought it was about an hour difference, the length between the theatrical and this one, but it's actually only about 30 minutes. So
yeah, and then 20 minutes of additional credits. Because at first, when I put this on, I'm like, oh man, 4 hours. And then I look and I realise it's literally half an hour of credits. So it's actually only 3.5 hours, even extended. It's something called fan club credits, according to this.
Yeah, I looked into this as well. They had people were able to pay to get their names in the credits.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's also a bit like, why?
Yeah, because I tell you now, no one's watching them. I didn't watch the 30 minutes of credits of this film.
I didn't. I think it's about 28 minutes of credits, which is madness, absolute madness.
As you so often can, you can really tell, and there's no real way of getting around this, and I'm sure it's going to come up a lot when we do Harry Potter, which we're doing a whole series of the Harry Potter movies next. You can really tell it's a film based on a book, can't you? There's certain things where you watch it going, I'm sure in the book that is a whole chapter or two. For me, the big one is the start of the journey. And first they're outside, and then there's those crow things that are watching them, so they have to move to the snowy mountains. Then there's a storm, and they have to go into the kind of the underground tunnely bit.
The mines of Moria.
Yeah, and there's no other way of doing that. But for me, it's the biggest example of I am imagining the stuff outside, the stuff on the snowy mountains, a good 1 to 3 chapters, if not more, of the book. I've not read the book, so it may be a lot more. I don't know. And probably, better for it in the book, I would imagine. That kind of it's almost brushed over quite quickly in this. There are points where, for me, the river, clearly not Riverdale, but wherever they,
it's Riverdale.
Riverdale. Oh, it is Riverdale. Oh, cool.
Riverdale. Riverdale rather than Riverdale, but yeah, Riverdale. You were there,
right? Okay. The Riverdale scenes. I turned to Jess and I'm like, I feel like we've sort of paused and slowed the movie right down for this stuff, and it's not bad, it's good scenes, but I feel like we've sort of paused a bit pacing wise, and then I look and I see that the first book is divided into 2 books, and I see the start of the summary of the second book is Frodo wakes up in Riverdale, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense why that feels like that. And I don't think any book adaptation avoids this. But I really definitely, if we're looking at what were the big observations we had watching this? There's some stuff about character, which I'm sure we'll get into. But my other big observation was, this definitely feels like a book that's been adapted into a film, which is probably a shit observation because it is. But do you agree? Can you make that point more interesting?
That's a big ask. No, I'm kidding. No, I think you're right. No, I think you're onto something. I think one of the most interesting things I came away from watching this was about the pacing and the way it's structured. And I think the stuff you're talking about there is all structural. I do think a book's structure and a film's structure, just at their sort of general core, if you're really boiling them down, are so different, so different, that whenever you adapt a book into a film, the film ends up having this really specific sort of pace that only happens when you're having to condense a book down into 2 hours, 3 hours, And particularly in this case, because the ebbs and flows of a movie are not the same as the ebbs and flows of a book. Like the 3-act structure that a movie sort of follows is not the structure of a book. And to make a book fit a 3-act structure would be to absolutely tear it to pieces in a way that would displease fans. Even if it might end up making a potentially better movie in isolation, then it's not really a fair adaptation of this thing they love, though. So then you've got that balance to hit. Now, I think what's interesting about this is it is a movie of two halves, because the pacing of the book goes that way. And you're absolutely right. The first movie is, the Shire, Frodo acquiring the ring, going on his adventure, nearly dying, getting to Rivendell, and him being like, that was quite an adventure, but now I've achieved my goal. The ring is in Rivendell. It's safe now, or whatever. I don't really care what you guys do with it. That is a story. That's a complete story. It's almost a perfect movie in a weird way. You could take the first hour, and I think I looked at the timer specifically because I knew I was going to make this point. I reckon that Rivendell stuff, it's somewhere around an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes into the movie. That's a movie. You have a movie. An hour and 30 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes. It's a very brisk movie, to be fair, but it's got action beats, it's got tension, it's got a goal, an escalation, and then the achieving of a goal. That's a movie, right?
Yeah. So I've got it because I watched it on Amazon, and we should say here, by the way, because I don't think I've explicitly said it. We watched the extended versions for this. For all 3 films, we're watching the extended versions.
Yes.
And I bought them through Amazon Prime, so I can tell you now it's 1 hour, 24 minutes that Frodo wakes up in Rivendell.
Okay, so you wouldn't cut exactly where he wakes up in Rivendell because you want the coda. You'd probably cut somewhere between him waking up in Rivendell and the meeting with that,
or even the
somewhere
the
in there is where you'd end one movie and start the next.
Well, to be fair, they basically leave to start the quest at about 1 hour, kind of 48-ish. So you could even do it there.
So yeah, you could somewhere in that region, somewhere in that sort of 20-minute section of the movie, you find a cut, because then your next movie, structurally speaking, is the forming of the Fellowship, and then the disbanding of the Fellowship. It's Empire Strikes Back. It's the gang are together. They've got the goal, but it doesn't work out. We end on a bit of a bummer note. We've lost one of them. They're all divided. Some kidnapped. Some off on their own because they fear for they don't trust their fellow Fellowship members. The way this movie ends is quite Empire, really. Leaves a lot still out, to be dealt with, and I think when you look at it as 2 acts like that, the movie structure makes a lot more sense. When you sit down to watch it as a movie, though, it ebbs and flows in a way that movies just generally don't, which is like there are mini climaxes coming at you, and then slowdowns, then rising, and then it really has to ebb and flow. Which is, I think, what creates that feeling. And going back to your very first point, which was, it really does feel like a book adaptation, but it's just because a movie would never structure itself that way. I actually think, though, with all that in mind, I think it's paced surprisingly well, though. At no point was I checking my phone for the time.
I agree completely, and And actually, Jess and I had this debate because afterwards, in fact, this morning, I'm like, right, I've got to go do the podcast, and she's like, if you want my review, it's a lot of walking, then they have a fight, and then there's some more walking. And I went, I don't think there's that much walking in this movie. And she's like, there is. And I was like, look it up. I don't think there is. And she looked it up. There's only 13 minutes of walking in this movie. And across the whole thing, there's only, well, I don't know if that's extended, actually, that she got the fact for, but whatever. There's about 20%, 20% walking across the whole trilogy. And I completely agree with you about the pacing. I was not at any point checking my watch, bored. There's some bits, not Riverdale, but the second elf place they go. I think, it meanders a little around there. Yes. But I was quite pleasantly surprised by, especially given my memory of it, although again I went in going, that's probably because I was a snooty 13-year-old who just didn't particularly want to be forced to watch it, but I was pleasantly surprised by the pacing and stuff of this movie. It is very, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happened, in a good way, because it's a quest movie. It's about a quest, so you expect it to be this happens, then this happens, then this happens. This is structured like any kind of road trip movie is. I just to pause there to ask a kind of question that is going to take us away from the movie slightly. I think because of franchising, because of things being connected, we've reached a point where people are a bit too afraid to have their shit touched, right? And that's why we end up with, instead of rebooting Indiana Jones, we end up with Harrison Ford coming back to play old Indiana Jones, and hopefully there's going to be a character that will continue it on. Back in the day, they were a bit. The reason characters don't get to become iconic unless multiple people play them, right? That's what happened with James Bond. Multiple people play him. That's what happened with the Doctor. Whereas now we're a bit too protective. The Harry Potter, because people love Radcliffe and that cast, they've not been remade. That's going to happen at some point. It has to happen at some point. Right. They've just got to take that Band-Aid off. The really interesting thing about Lord of the Rings is kind of as exciting as it is to explore the second age of Middle-earth or whatever it is. Yeah. I'm watching this film going, it's a little bit of a shame though, because surely the best version of this story is a TV show. Yes. And do you know what I mean? And I think there's some legal implications with the current show that it couldn't kind of be a continuation or a retelling maybe. But that is just going, right, okay, Frodo is bigger than Elijah Wood. Gandalf is bigger than Ian McKellen. So we're doing it. We're retelling that story with a 3-season TV show, and we've got 8 hours to tell the story of each book. Like, that's the best version of this story.
But I do think it's worth adding here that I actually think the reason Harry Potter isn't having that happen is different to the reason Lord of the Rings isn't. And I'm not even talking about the legal stuff. I think with Harry Potter, those movies aren't great, but people are very protective of those actors in those roles. Whereas here, I think there's a feeling that they got very lucky, fans of Lord of the Rings, that they got such great adaptations of the books, because I honestly don't know if you can adapt the books any better than this. I truly don't. Because if you move it to TV...
You get too into lore, and you think that whilst I'm saying about take the Snowy Mountain scene, are you basically... is kind of what you're saying, actually, Chris... We don't need a 45-minute version of that Snowy Mountain scene.
Look, if you want to, if you did it as a TV show, that's what you do, and that would be an episode. Yeah. That would be an episode. The struggle up the side of that mountain and the failure of that. 100%. No, but now these exist. The reason people are protective isn't because of the castings so much. It's more about the quality. It's that risk that if you try it again now for television, you might get it wrong. It's like, so with Harry Potter, the risk is we're very attached to these actors in these roles. Those movies aren't great, but fine. Like, I even think fans of the Harry Potter movies understand those movies they're far from perfect. They're very imperfect. That's people who like them. Whereas this is considered like a really top tier adaptation just in terms of its successful ability to create the feeling and honor the source material and all that stuff. And while I think you're right, now, if these movies had never existed at all, Lord of the Rings would come up and it would be a high-budget television show because you'd get the story done properly that way. We didn't get that. We got these. These are so popular and beloved. It's like, why would you attempt it again? Why would you tempt fate a second time with another adaptation? We got lucky enough that it wasn't a shit show the first time. Look at what happened with the Hobbit movies. You know what I mean? I think, I think fans. I agree with your point. I think it's for different reasons, though. I don't think people are going, don't recast Frodo. I think people are going, don't touch it. We got it right. Would it have been better as a TV series? Maybe, but these things are so good.
Well, but also not.
Will it
not
ever be that good again?
Not in 2001. Wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have. This is if you're going to make.
They'd have just happened by 2001, though. I mean, they're not like, you know. But I'm saying now the reason we're not going back to that is people are like, you got it right. Let's not tempt fate.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, how amazing is it that they even got it right as like a film they couldn't have done it as a TV show sort of thing?
Exactly. Because in 2001, TV budgets wouldn't have allowed for this. Technology wouldn't have allowed for that to be a TV thing. This could only have happened in a very high budget scenario, and it did have a very high budget. So they did a lot.
So what do you think then is the key ingredient? What do you think makes it work so well? Because I agree with you that it works. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's the choice to let the world come to us through the characters. So the book, my memory of it, and I'm going to add my memory of it because it's been a long time since I've read Lord of the Rings. I've read The Hobbit more recently, I think, closer to like within my adulthood, because I love that book. But the Lord of the Rings book specifically, I slogged through in my teen years and haven't gone back to. So please, if I'm wrong, do feel free to correct me, but also, be nice about it because I'm being upfront about the fact that this could be marred by memory. But my memory of the Lord of the Rings books is there's a lot of a character mentioning a thing, and then the book just going into an explanation of what that thing is. Mm-hmm. Couple of pages of the history of that thing. Now you can't do that in a movie, quite frankly, without having either huge swaths of very clunky dialogue or some sort of narrator telling you the history of the thing. Now, I know there's a little narration at the start of this movie. That was actually added after the fact. The movie was pretty much done without that. But the studio got nervous and asked Jackson to put in a 2-minute prologue. He then created a 7-minute prologue because Peter Jackson is absolutely unable to make anything brief or brisk, as evidenced by his 8-hour fucking Beatles documentary. But anyway, which he actually wanted to be about 20 hours, 18 hours, if I heard correctly. But anyway, so I sit down like watching this, knowing that the books do a lot of stopping to give me the backstory, the glossary, the explanation. And I fear that I'm going to turn this thing on and it's going to be a lot of, in the Second Age, Smoofty Foo of the land of Floodily went to such a thing and gave them a magic sword. And the magic sword was passed down until, Boggar the Great killed such a... And just names and places and irrelevant things that might give more context to the world, but doesn't really help me understand the characters. I'm not saying Lord of the Rings books do that, like, to that extreme, but there is a lot of explaining the world. For me, what I think works about this film and these films is Peter Jackson understood that you can't do the narration, but he still wanted to get the world building in. So instead, they crafted this really brilliant narrative where we learn about what's happened in the world of man through Aragorn, through Boromir. We learn about the position of the elves through their time in Rivendell and their time in where does Galadriel live? Lothlorien. It's the most Scottish sounding thing I've ever heard in my life. Lothlorien, which is where that's where they live. So you've got we're getting bits of the world. Basically, he scattered the world building through the movie in subtler ways than the books did. So when they get to the Mines of Moria, and not only are the dwarves dead, but they've been dead a while. You can put together how long Sauron has been at work building his armies, doing the damage. Word didn't reach, the Shire or Rivendell of this fate for these dwarves, or even Gimli's own dwarf sort of tribe, wherever he's from. That in itself tells you a lot about the world has been slowly decaying around them for a while, and they've not necessarily known about it. And that's really cool world building without really doing a huge amount of stopping to explain it. Gandalf doesn't turn around and say, "Well, it appears these were killed in the age of at the end of this, the beginning of the Third Age, at this date, and there must have been a great battle here that was a result of this king doing this and this leader doing this and all these choices." They get there and they're as surprised as anyone to find the place like that. And you see the aftermath of what's been happening, and you start to put it together. So I think that's really clever. That's just one small example that I'm picking on because it's just a scene where I felt the weight of what was happening in the world without them having to give me a glossary. So I've rambled too long there.
And I think sorry, I just slammed the wind guard on the microphone into my face.
We're professionals.
I think we're good at this. We promise.
We're good at this.
I think they do that. They do that to help with the pacing as well. And I know that's sort of what you were talking about as well. And another great example of that is when Frodo wakes up in Rivendell, Gandalf is just there. And the last time we saw Gandalf, he was stuck on that big sort of tower thing. And he wakes up. I think
he leapt on the eagle and flew away, if memory serves. We saw that, I think.
No. So this is the point I'm going to make. When Frodo wakes up and he's there, the last time we see him, he's trapped on that thing, and he whispers something to a bird. But the last time we've seen him, he's trapped, and then Gandalf tells Frodo how he escaped, which was to jump on the eagle thing.
Oh, right. Okay. Is that the structure? That's quite clever.
Because by doing it that way, it's not like we've had to see that, and then we cut and we see their reunion, and then they have a chat about something. It's just, it actually, whilst at first you're like, and as I said, literally out loud, how come Gandalf is back? Actually, narratively, for the purpose of keeping things moving, having him be back and then tell someone how he got back is a really good narrative choice. And this movie's full of examples like that, where they just do it so subtly that doesn't even become your memory of it. Like you saying, well, no, didn't he do that? He did, but he tells him that.
Yeah, and that allows you to not. It doesn't have to then be a scene. It can be a quick cut-in rather than a whole sequence of its own. Because if they just cut to that shot at some point in the sort of 20-minute section of the movie where Frodo they're trying to get him to Rivendell, it would interrupt the tension of Frodo, whether he might survive the stabbing he's received. But two, you wouldn't get away with it being a 10-second shot like it is in that moment. You'd have to make it a sequence, right? Where he has to climb the tower, and the forces of Saruman are following him up, and he's getting to the side. Then he leaps off and gets on the eagle, and they make it a whole thing. It would have to be a 2-3 minute sequence at the very least to not feel really weird and affect the pacing. So you're right, actually, it's quite a clever choice to just have him basically retell it, and then you just do a quick cut shot of what it looked like.
Yeah, and we see a bit of him getting beaten up, I think, by Saruman. But yeah, it's just.
I think that does that not happen? That him being beat up by Saruman's earlier, though, isn't it?
Possibly. I
don't think that's in the moment he's talking to Frodo. I think that's something we actually saw earlier on. Because there's that amazing shot of him just spinning on his head. It's one of my favourite things.
That shot I think is earlier. So it cuts to it about 1:25, and Gandalf has buggered off again by 1:26. So yeah, it's literally a minute long. You're right. I think the majority of the beating up stuff is earlier. Mm-hmm. And there's loads of narrative choices like that in this movie. Yes. But here's a question about that then, Dan.
Yes.
So we completely agree. Characters are used brilliantly to build the world.
Yes.
Do you think that comes slightly, just putting it out there, Lord of the Rings fans, don't get angry, purpose of discussion. Do you think that comes slightly at the expense of character and character motivation for example, do they explore enough why Merry and Pippin go along with them? Do they explore enough why Gimli and Legolas are willing to join the Fellowship and put their lives at risk?
Right. Yeah, I think they don't give enough context for those characters' involvement, but I think
don't.
The reason is slightly different. I think it's actually more a result of them putting the focus, because there's like 9 of them, right? The focus, I think, is on Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, and Frodo, and I guess a little bit Sam. I think they've had to choose because you can't give everyone the level of screen time you give Aragorn, Boromir, Gandalf, Frodo, and a little bit Sam. Those characters have to be the heart of this movie, because what this movie is ultimately about is about demonstrating Frodo's strength despite his size and his seeming, quaintness. He's unassuming little hobbit fella. He runs around, he gardens. That's what hobbits do. He eats and he gardens. To see him in a situation where he's required to be deeply brave and do all that. That's showing his strength and bravery is the point of this movie, and comparing that to the weakness of man, through Boromir, who is, certainly, got strong thoughts of his own about what should happen with that ring, but really he's making the same mistakes of Isildur, who had the chance to destroy the ring and didn't. So for me, I think it's Isildur. I think I'm saying it. I always put an S sound in there, but I think it's a sound. Isildur, not Isildur, I think. But fucking Tolkien and his words. So for me, all of that really complicated, cool character stuff for, Frodo and Boromir and even Aragorn's reluctance, because, Aragorn's got this brilliant arc in this, not even arc, but position in this, where he's showing strength through reluctance. He's the better man in a weird way, but because he's so reluctant to get involved, he's technically king. Bloodline-wise, he should be ruling, and he's chosen to become a ranger. That tells you an awful lot about his character. He doesn't necessarily think he's worthy of looking after the ring. He doesn't try to take the ring at any point. He knows Frodo's the better man almost, and that's him having learned from his ancestors' weakness. He knows the story of Isildur, and he's learned. So watching those three interact with this situation where there's a great deal of power up for grabs, and seeing how they either refuse that call, accept that call, demonstrate strength or weakness in Boromir's case. But there was strength in Boromir's weakness, which is also interesting, because at the end he still fights to the death for Merry and Pippin, 2 characters he met, not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So I think all of that really cool, complicated character stuff that I've just laid out would be weakened because you'd have to take time away from all of that if you wanted to spend more time establishing Gimli and Legolas and Merry and Pippin, who are great characters for what they need to do in this story. But you just have to just presume they have their own reasons for wanting to help.
I wish we'd got a bit more on Sam, and I don't know if that's only a memory thing, because my memory of Sam and Frodo and the way Sam and Frodo are talked about is this great friendship where Sam is the most loyal friend in the world and refuses to leave Frodo's side. And that's in this movie, but it's constantly played as, I made a promise to Gandalf. And I finished this movie going, I wish it could be a bit more about, no, you're one of my best mates, and not, at least in this film, so much about, well, I promised Gandalf, so I better do it.
I had that exact same thought, and I'm very curious to see if the movies intentionally shift it. So it starts as being about the promise to Gandalf, but becomes about, you're my best friend. You're this great person. I really want to be there to help you. You've got so much to achieve, and I can contribute to that by helping you. And I want to be part of that. And I think, and protecting you is important. No, not just practically, because I believe you might be the one to actually save everyone, but also as a human being, I really love and respect you and value you as a friend. I'm wondering if they'll evolve it from the promise to the friendship. Maybe they won't. Maybe that'll just the rhetoric will change, and they won't really give a reason as to why. I'm not sure. But that's something I'm going to be watching out for in the next movie, particularly because I think their friendship is tested most in Two Towers. I think the arc of that movie, and I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this. I'm not trying to spoil the movie for you. But my memory of it is that they go through a bit of a Harry and Ron in the final Harry Potter book arc in the next movie,
right?
Where they sort of like have a bit of a disagreement at a certain point and then come back together, and that helps strengthen their friendship. I could be wrong.
Nice.
I could be misremembering. But yeah.
One of my most enjoyable bits of this movie was, did you say Sean Bean's character is called Boromir?
Boromir, yes.
Boromir. When Boromir says one does not simply walk into Mordor or whatever he says, I literally out loud exclaimed in joy, "That's the meme!" Jess was like, "What?" I was like, "That's the meme."
I know. And there's so many memes from this movie. It's going to be really hard because the next one has two in it that I'm aware of, that I remember. One is going to be Sam going, "Potatoes, boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew." That's going to fucking kill me. And then, because of the song, Legolas saying, "They're taking the hobbits to Isengard." Because obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, there was a famous, at the time, someone put together a song with that as the line, it's like that on loop. Right. The hobbits to Isengard to a beat. And all I'm gonna hear when I see that now is when that moment comes up, I'm gonna be hearing that song.
I also couldn't remember for sure Boromir dying, but I assumed he did because he's played by Sean Bean.
Played by Sean Bean, yeah, absolutely.
So I was like, well, presumably he's dying. His death is done very well.
We should talk about that whole sequence actually, because for a movie that puts Frodo and Gandalf and Aragorn / Strider at the front of the story, really the hero of this story in the end. The guy that goes down swinging, defending these two hobbits he barely knows, who also no longer, worth adding, Merry and Pippin at that point are of no value to the grander plot. And he knows that. If anything, they
keep fucking it up. They're the reason they got attacked in, Merry, I think it is.
Yes,
is
in the mines. Yes.
Yeah,
100%. So, showing him after he just displayed the largest amount of weakness I think a person could display in this franchise, which is, why don't we just use the power of the ring? Let's just use it. We'll win with that. Shows exactly how weak he can be, followed by this ultimate show of strength, willing to die for these two characters that he's basically met, at this point, a week ago? It's hard to tell how long they've been traveling in the movie. You assume a reasonable amount of time has passed. It's incredible. And they really, the movie doesn't just do it as because look, unless a movie would have him run in, don't hurt the hobbits, and he'd be fighting a bit and he'd get stabbed and they'd run away. But this movie shows him getting shot with arrow after arrow, and there's slow motion, and then he gets back up and he's still fighting. It's crazy how much time and effort and how much care is taken with the choice of shots and his acting, and every arrow going in, you're just like, what will stop this man? He's so determined to save these guys. Or to at least try, because obviously in the end he doesn't succeed, which is also one of the sort of downer ending Empire Strikes Back elements of the end of this movie. Just what a brilliant moment for that character. And it comes less than 10 minutes, I think, after his biggest moment of weakness. What mixed feelings you have on the character of Boromir. What a complex character he is in such a short space of time.
What a brave, and again, it feels like Peter Jackson being truthful and loyal to the books, because it's, as a climax to the film, them getting attacked in the woods by these creatures is not, do you know what I mean? There are more epic set pieces in this movie early on than that final set piece. But the by pinning it on Boromir's death and Frodo's decision, and Aragorn's decision as well to let Frodo go, you're making it incredibly human, incredibly emotional.
Right.
And I mean, obviously, I know one's a Hobbit, but in terms of kind of the emotion, that end sequence is incredibly character led for a film that has in places been narrative led.
Right.
And I think that's what's also so effective about it. You know, Boromir's final speech to Aragorn about him being his king and stuff like that is very emotional. And Sam chasing after Frodo, you know, this film does not build to and end on a huge action set piece. It ends on some real character stuff, and it's very effective.
Yeah, and I think that is something that you're right. I think you know, a studio could easily be like, well, wait a minute, you need to end on something bigger scale than this. You know, you need to end on a giant fight. You need to end on essentially something like the Mines of Moria, which is probably the biggest set piece in the movie. Would you say? I think it is, right?
Yeah,
it is. So. Yeah, because it's got the small scale fight in the little tomb. And then the big giant scale chase followed by the Balrog, which is like this big epic thing. And So you know, I could absolutely see a studio being like, no, you end the movie there because that's your big epic sequence, you know, to end the movie on. But for me, I really do respect the choice to say, well, actually, this small skirmish in the woods will give us more chance to give character closure and make the characters make big decisions that will have repercussions throughout the next 3 movies, and let us explore all this stuff. And that's way more satisfying and interesting than just a big fight. We you know, and I think that's partly a Jackson choice, partly just what the structure of the books was anyway. But I will also add, again, not my mic, god damn it, why today are we so bad at this? No, I'm manifesting that we're good at this. What I think is really remarkable is that my memory of the books is that these sequences and choices are way more clinical. I think Jackson really has brought a lot more humanity to these sequences than certainly my memory of the books does. My memory of the books is that it's very clinical and logical, and like Frodo's like, well, I can't trust any of these fuckers, so I'm off. It's not played as a big emotional choice, you know. I don't believe Boromir's death is played quite as emotionally either. You know, I think it's played a lot more clinically. And again, I could be wrong. Please, Lord of the Rings, you know, you beautiful Lord of the Rings nerds out there that know all the things about all Lord of the Rings, feel free to, you know, dissuade me of that view. If you think I'm wrong and I'm remembering it wrong, then absolutely let me know in the comments. But that's my memory of it, and it's really it's interesting, isn't it? That like, I think, you know, you watch a movie like this where it's your memory of it goes like, oh, it's all these big epic battles, isn't it? Lord of the Rings. I remember Lord of the Rings. The first image that pops into my head when I think of Lord of the Rings is happy Shire stuff with hobbits running around farming and crazy battles like Helm's Deep. Those are the 2 images that immediately strike me. I don't have the imagery of these scenes at the end, this skirmish in the woods, is not iconic in the same way that imagery is, but it's way more powerful ultimately to me, because again, as you said, it's got all this great character stuff in it, and it's deeply satisfying. This works as a movie. I really feel like you have just enough information that you never feel like you're out of the loop, and that you should read the book to understand the context more. And the reason they do that is they focus on the characters, and you're always going to get the right amount of character information because of the way it's structured. It's so clever. It's so good, so good. Young Dan was an idiot.
I think it helps that, you know, if you compare to something like Harry Potter, especially the earlier stories, it helps that this is, you know, even the books, and I've not read them, but the story is, like I said earlier, it's a road trip movie, it's a quest movie, which gives you a narrative thrust of, we go here, this happens, we go here, this happens, we go here, this happens. You don't have to sort of somehow demonstrate an entire year going by in a movie, like, you know, the challenge of some of those earlier Harry Potter movies in particular. Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, that helps things. But I think you're absolutely right. The movie itself makes some very clever decisions to thrust that forward and do that. And just the fact that you're never really confused. Like, my memory of it was confusion, and it's, I just couldn't have been paying attention, because it really isn't confusing. I think that opening monologue is needed. I think that absolutely helps. I think the studio was actually right to suggest that goes in, and obviously it helps that we saw an extended version of that, because I know the extended film has an extended version of that monologue at the beginning.
Oh right, okay. I didn't know that, but sure. I did mean to Google what the differences were and never got a chance. So if you happen to have looked that up, I'll be curious if there's any other ones you have. I know that the Shire stuff is quite extended, like Bilbo's party and things like that are a bit more extended in this version. But I don't know beyond that what else has got a lot added to it. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, because it's like I basically got a list. I don't know what a lot of them mean, but the beginning of the list is prolong extended, concerning hobbits added, the Shire extended, very old friends extended, a long expected party extended, which would suggest there's a lot of kind of extended Shire stuff at the beginning.
Yeah, that's what I'd read, but I didn't have any details about what that included, but that just seems like it's almost everything. So that might be why I couldn't get a clarification on what was extended, because maybe it was indeed most of it.
That was funny as well, because I'd forgotten how much Bilbo was in this movie, and I was just like, I kept referring to him as Martin Freeman.
That was a real pleasure for me as well, because I don't know if it's just bad memory or whatever, but I didn't remember how many little references to The Hobbit were in this. Subtle ones to big ones, and they even do one that you wouldn't even necessarily know was a reference. It feels like it's part of this movie. Like if you've never read a Hobbit, Lord of the Rings book, you have no knowledge of the Tolkienverse, right? And you sit down to watch this movie, you've got Bilbo, and he was a Hobbit that went on an adventure. You immediately understand that's quite unusual for a Hobbit. Then he's at the party telling his story about the goblins, which I, as a reader of the books, not the goblins, sorry, the trolls, I know is a famous scene from the book. It's one of my favourites. It's when basically he gets basically Gandalf's a bastard in The Hobbit. There's a whole section of the book where he just goes, "You're on your own, bye Bilbo," just fucks off. And despite having dragged Bilbo out of his comfort zone and dumped him in the world where he's a little hobbit that doesn't know what's going on, Gandalf abandons him, like, I think at least twice, but Gandalf fucks off a couple of times. And there's one where he gets into a real situation with these trolls, and he basically keeps them talking until the sun comes up, which turns them to stone. It's Bilbo using his wits to get out of a situation rather than his brawn. And it's a great moment in that book. But if you don't know that, they still get to basically tell that story in this movie, subtly, through a sequence that you would just think was part of this movie's story and telling you something about Bilbo. Because at the beginning, he tells the kids that story, briefly. You hear him telling the small hobbit children that he waited until the sun came up and it turned them to stone, and you go, he might be talking shit. If you don't know, I think there's a reasonable... I think there's an absolute... It would not be unreasonable for a human being to watch this movie and when they get to that scene think he's talking shit, Bilbo, and he's exaggerating his truth. But later in the movie, during the sequence when they're trying to get to Rivendell, when Frodo's just been stabbed and Sam's trying to distract him and keep him with him from going unconscious, he's like, "Look, Sam, we found Bilbo's goblins." Frodo, he's like pointing out the statues, and they're there, and they look I keep saying goblins, sorry, trolls. We found Bilbo's trolls, Frodo, and he's right, they're there, they're all around him, exactly sat around the campfire, exactly how I pictured it when I read the Hobbit book, and it's like, that's brilliant. That's so good, because it's a great reference for me, a fan of that book. It's part of the story, naturally, if it isn't. If you haven't read those, if that's not your context, and it tells us something about Bilbo, and it's all just layered in, like completely naturally. Like, did that stick out to you as, they're making a very deliberate reference, or were you just like, that's a little payoff to the moment we had earlier?
It just felt, all of that stuff felt like, but it's. I almost can't answer that because I've got the knowledge that it becomes another film series. It might, to be honest with you, during those moments in my head, I'm thinking if this was George Lucas, it would look exactly the same as it then looks in the Hobbit movies. So I was sort of...
Peter Jackson has made a joke about that, actually, regarding Gollum in this movie, because the model they used for Gollum in this movie, for his brief shadowy appearance, was upgraded and changed quite a lot from the design we get in the next movie where he appears a lot more. And Jackson has often joked that he'd do a George Lucas and go back and put the correct model in this one, but he's never done it.
some of the flashbacks early on as well in this would be Martin Freeman. Like,
yeah, so in the Hobbit
him.
movies, just as a little bit of fun, they do recreate those exact shots, but with Martin Freeman.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was slightly distracted by my knowledge. I think if I was watching it without that knowledge, yeah, I'd just see them as references and a payoff to Bilbo's story, and they definitely make it, because that's the other thing, they make it feel like he's been on an adventure. But you know what? I think it's because, and the casting in Harry Potter is amazing, and as you said earlier, that is the problem. The notion of picturing anyone but Robbie Coltrane playing Hagrid is hard to bear. But some of the Harry Potter casting, you're like, that's amazing casting, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's always an amazing performance. Whereas in this, every performance is absolutely stunning. Like, Dominic Monaghan is just absolutely doing so much with a relatively small part. And actually, all of them are. Like, everyone. Liv Tyler.
Billy Boyd as Mary.
Everyone is brilliant in this.
Yeah, I forget the actors now off the top of my head, but the... oh, Christ. He plays Gimli. What's the guy called who plays Gimli? John Rhys Davis. John Rhys Davis. He's great as Gimli. He gives a really good, like, almost fun performance. Like, obviously, we've already talked about Sean Bean being brilliant. Sean Austin's great as Sam.
Hugo Weaving.
Yeah, Hugo Weaving. Obviously, Orlando Bloom. Perfect for Legolas. Galadriel. Obviously, Cate Blanchett. I mean, Ian Holm, look, Martin Freeman's wonderful and a perfect Bilbo in those movies. But Ian Holm, as sort of older Bilbo, is absolutely remarkable. His performance is... Actually, his performance is really what sells you on the ring's ability to corrupt. Because when you see him not thinking about the ring, just interacting with people, he's such a sweet, fun character. Sort of pottering about his house, making tea or whatever. That when you see it's even corrupted him, you just sort of go, fuck, like, yeah, okay. Like, and that's all his performance, right? Like, yeah.
It's that moment where he, in Riverdale, when he realises the ring is there, and he goes, give it to me! Like, yeah, and it's just...
like, yeah, almost like a cat, like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's so pitch perfect. It's it's scary. Like, it's genuinely scary. Mm-hmm. Hugo Weaving had a run, because I looked it up to see if, like, by chance he had bit parts in any of our other trilogies, because obviously we've done The Matrix as well. Hugo Weaving had a run. This was his run of movies: Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship, The Two Towers, The Matrix Reloaded, The Matrix Revolutions, Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. Like, what a run of, like, epic blockbusters, like huge franchise movies, like 5 in a row. Madness.
And then he did. I think I don't know exactly how shortly thereafter, but I'm pretty sure V for Vendetta was only a year or two after Return of the King, and I think V for Vendetta is one of his greatest movies.
Return of the King is 2003, and V for Vendetta is 2006.
Ah, there you go. Really, 2006
so,
V for Vendetta? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm on the Wikipedia. Oh, wait, it's listed as 2006, but if you hover over V for Vendetta, it says V for Vendetta is a 2005 dystopian.
Yeah, I would have thought it was slightly earlier than that, because I think I watched it when the only reason I happen to know is because I think I watched it before I went to uni. I remember watching it while I was still at college, and I think I was by 2006 I would have been uni, or maybe that was 2007.
Yeah, the actual page for the film says 2005, but on Hugo Weaving's filmography section, it's listed as 06. Weird.
Yeah, but yeah, anyway. I mean that's another great one though. He's an absolute, it's another masterpiece, really. Performance-wise,
just I was really impressed by, like, just everyone's performances in this.
Liv Tyler as well.
Good.
Liv Tyler, who I genuinely, and this is going to sound awful, but has had a patchy history, I think, acting-wise. I think there have been performances she's given that I've really enjoyed, and performances that she's given that I've been like, I don't really buy that, which is a shame. I think I think when she's on form, she's very good. Maybe it's more when she's cast correctly to take the weight of that being like on her not being good at her job, which seems cruel. But when cast correctly, when it all works, she's so good. But in this movie particularly, she's very good as well. And we haven't even mentioned Viggo Mortensen yet, who absolutely. Just an absolutely magnetic performance as Aragorn. Like, even when he's all hooded and just in the corner of the room, you literally can't. You're so watching him the whole time, right?
So charismatic, and actually, we've not mentioned Christopher Lee either. Who there is in the hands of a lesser actor, those lines are pantomime. You could easily. It's a bit because it has to be. It's a very kind of archetypal villainous role. And in the hands of a lesser actor, that could come across as silly. But yes. Christopher Lee brings such gravitas to it, especially in the scenes where he's acting opposite Ian McKellen. And it really is kind of a masterclass.
And I think as well for him, this he just sneaking some trivia now, so I have to do it later. Christopher Lee is the only member of the cast or crew that had actually met Tolkien. Christopher Lee was a lifelong Lord of the Rings fan. He read them every year. From his young age to he made a deliberate effort to meet Tolkien when he was younger, and he also ended up accidentally fulfilling a small role as almost like a consultant, like a Tolkien expert. Like there were things he caught that they weren't getting right while working on this movie. So he put a lot of love into this. He really loved and respected this franchise and was so pleased to be a part of it. And that's remarkable, really. And he's so good, and you could tell he's given absolutely everything to this. I mean, to be fair, Christopher Lee gives everything to everything. We saw Christopher Lee in a movie on this very series. We saw him in Gremlins 2. He always delivers. He's always brilliant. But this is such a powerhouse performance, and he's not in this movie an awful lot, but you remember him. Like, there are parts of this movie that faded from my memory over the years, but I'll tell you what will never leave my memory is the moment when him and Gandalf are talking, and you realise that Saruman has been corrupted and is now working for Sauron. I will never forgive Tolkien for making those two villain characters have such similar names, by the way.
Yeah,
Never.
I pointed that out. I pointed that out to Jess. I was like, wait, so hold on. So this dude's called this and the villain's called this. And it kind of almost spoils it because you just assume the two are going to go together.
Yeah, it's really annoying. So Sauron is the big eye. Saruman is Saruman the Grey, I want to say. Or Saruman the Wise, something like that. Because who's the Grey? Oh, because it's Gandalf the Grey. Because he becomes Gandalf the White. We've got Radagast the Brown. Yeah, so he's the wise. So Saruman, which is Christopher Lee's character, is a wizard like Gandalf who happens to end up working for Sauron because he sees the writing on the wall that Sauron's going to take over anyway, I guess, and he decides that he's going to better assist him with that and have a place at his side than try and fight it, which is understandable because they went through however long that big war that we saw at the beginning of this movie went on for before that guy suspiciously easily chopped off the ring off his fingers with his broken sword. Just saying, the all-powerful ring, swing of a broken sword and it's gone. I don't know if that's that good.
Hey, now Dan, that sword is still sharp. Thousands and hundreds of years later. So
look, I'm not saying it ain't a sharp sword. I'm not saying it's a sharp sword. I'm just saying if you tried that shit with Thanos, he'd just snap his fingers and make your sword turn into butterflies. Like it, it ain't working. That's power. I must say actually that is kind of a weird thing about this movie is they tell you the ring has ultimate power, but they don't really ever demonstrate why it was so dangerous to be in his hands, other than that he's very strong in a fight. Because he swings a big bat. and a bunch of people get knocked away. Like, we never really see the capabilities of the ring to believe that it's such a threat. What they do though, which I think is really cool, is they spend a lot of time in this movie convincing us how evil the ring is, and how easily it corrupts. This movie spends so much time covering that, and that makes the ring feel menacing as a presence. It almost has the presence of like a Horcrux in, like, you know, from the Harry Potter series, in terms of like, it's an object of evil the heroes have to handle that starts to slowly corrupt and change them. And obviously, Lord of the Rings did it first, so I think the Horcruxes are based on the ring rather than the other way around. But
there's a lot. Well, in general, there's a lot of, you know, that final Harry Potter book in this, and obviously Lord of the Rings came first, but I hadn't quite appreciated that before. It's like, this, you know, this feels very much Lord of the Rings-esque.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't want to say like copying. I would say homage, you know, inspiration. You know, it's these things that were, you know, the same as music. I think these things are a melting pot, right? You know, the music that came before you that inspired you will influence the music you write, and so on and so forth. Which is why that, like, you know, most modern bands, despite the fact they will sound nothing like the Beatles now, if you trace it back far enough, will come back to that, because the modern band will have been inspired by this band, who might have been inspired by like Nirvana, or, you know, the Pixies, who were inspired by the Beatles. You know, you can always trace it back. So yeah, even if J.K. wasn't consciously thinking Lord of the Rings, the influence Lord of the Rings has had on all media will have definitely had its influence on her, even if she hasn't directly read Lord of the Rings, which I'm sure she has. But even if she hadn't, you know, the elements of this story have weaved their way into popular culture so much so that they would have made it their way to her any other way. But yeah, I think that's a really cool thing the movie does. It does. So the movie fails to convince me the ring is as dangerous as they say it is in terms of its actual power, because all they ever show us is he can whack like 8 guys at once with a big bat when he's wearing it. Sauron,
and obviously, and Dan, you're not giving enough credit to being able to disappear. The movie very much makes it clear that you pop that ring on, you can disappear, my friend.
Yes, yeah, sure, yeah, that too. So, you know, it's funny that they talk about that ring's power. It doesn't really, like, the movie doesn't make it very clear in what way it's a threat, because that it is important. You wouldn't want it to fall into the enemy hands. It clearly has power, but world-ending power, it's not exactly just established to be Infinity Gauntlet style, which is that's how they talk about it. They talk about it like when Sauron gets it, he'll be able to just wipe humanity out with a glance. But we don't ever really see that demonstrated.
I interpreted it as, because the ring controls the other rings, which are in themselves also incredibly powerful.
Right.
That's a lot of its power as well. But I agree. I think that is a fair criticism of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, the amount of time they spend making the ring seem menacing and like it has a mind of its own, pretty strong, really good. Enjoy all that. It's great.
And again, and another choice that leads to amazing character stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Seeing how it like warps everyone's perspectives is fascinating.
Here's the thing that you know, you can't talk about this movie without talking about. Earlier on, you used the phrase "you remember that." You know what else you remember, Dan?
Go on.
New Zealand. Because fucking hell, does this film look beautiful? And not just the outdoor shots filmed in New Zealand, but the underground tunnels, the sets, and the work that's gone into lighting in particular. Like each location has a real aesthetic feel to it.
Yes.
And you know, Riverdale feel it almost, you know, the lighting, the cinematography of the different locations kind of alters place to place. And it's just visually beautifully constructed. And they just make the underground tunnels feel like one of the most menacing places in the world. And they partly do that from the way it's lit and the set is dressed. They make Riverdale look like one of the most peaceful places in the world. They make the Shire look like one of the most jolly places in the world. And they're doing it through pure cinematography, through lighting, through effects, through the location choices. It's kind of a masterclass of that.
Yeah. Because like Riverdale feels almost like they've gone to heaven. It's got that weird soft glow feel to it that you would put on a film if you were writing a film about characters going to heaven. It just feels very utopian. And yet, minutes before, we were in these like lush, like sort of, almost like West Yorkshire sort of like, sort of farmland. It's, how are you doing there? Oh, I'm making carrots. That's how farmers talk. They're making carrots. But it's like this quaint little farming town, Hobbiton, and then we're out in the muck and the mire. When they're being chased by the ring wraith, which is a scene I want to come back to because I fucking love that scene so much. And this like sort of this like almost like English pub, but it's dark and broody, and it's like, wait, now we're almost in like medieval times. Then we're in Riverdale, where it's like all ethereal and very utopian. Excuse me. And then we're in the fucking, New Zealand's incredible mountainscapes, snowy top mountains, and just land that just seems to go on forever. And then we're in the mountains, which have a completely different vibe as well. They're sort of claustrophobic and confined. But even then, within the mountains, there's that big chamber that's the opposite of that. And then we're in fucking the other place that I keep forgetting the name of. I can't really pronounce. Loch Lomond, the Scottish sounding place, which again has its completely different vibe. And it's hard to explain, but like every location feels so distinct, which considering they shot most of this in the same-ish area, part of the world, it feels like they must have shot this in like all four corners of the planet to get these looks.
Yeah, and it makes the world feel so much bigger, which in turn makes the threat feel so much bigger because the entire world feels massive because, and it's quite a clever choice as well to constantly cut to a map or show maps. That helps with that. But I think the distinctiveness of each location through the cinematography helps the world feel so huge.
Yeah, and I think as well, one thing that it does is it has the effect of making Frodo's choice at the end seem even more insane. Because while you know why he's done it, because we've had this sequence with Boromir, you do just think, God, the odds were against you when you had a wizard, an elf, a dwarf, and, your mates with you. You had a whole fucking guard of people with skills. The odds are like, if they were against you then, little hobbit fella with farming knowledge and not much else, this is insurmountable now. It really, the end of this movie, you just think like, you could almost go, I don't know how they achieve this. It's funny though.
I do.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, go on. No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say, counter to that, though, is Nadia did say to me that her memory of it was that when she was watching this movie, she didn't realise that it was going to be a trilogy. And she thought after Frodo gets away on the boat, he was going to, climb over that little cliff and Mount Doom would be just there and he'd chuck in the ring. That'd be the end of the movie. Bish, bash, bosh.
Well, I do on locations. I do have a logistics question, Dan, which I'm sure has been asked before and I'm sure there's an answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Is the eye in Mordor and in the same place? Because at the beginning of the movie, when sort of researching the ring, Gandalf appears to nip there fairly quickly. He goes, he has a look, he returns to the Shire, and then the rest of the trilogy is about making their way there. So is Gandalf looking at a different location? Is he just really far away and can see the mountainside? Do you know the answer to that?
I believe it's because there are two locations. This is Sauron problem again. So Saruman, the wise, the wizard, played by Christopher Lee, is in, is it called Isengard? Which is a stronghold for Saruman, where they've been where they've been using dark magic to make him an orc army. Sauron, the big eye thing, is in Mordor, which is much further away.
Locations. Cool. Right. Cool. Fine.
So
that makes sense now. And that was
where they've taken Merry and Pippin to is Isengard, and Isengard is a big part of the next movie.
Right.
But Frodo and Sam have got to go well past Isengard and crack on to Mordor, which is much further away. That's my understanding.
Yeah, cool. That was Jess was like, I'm pretty sure the big eye thing is in a different location.
Yes,
and I was like,
it is confusing, and it's the exact same problem. It's because Sauron lives in a big tower, and obviously, Mordor, the top of a big tower, is the big glowy eye thing, which represents Sauron. And now, it's worth noting, now, I've looked into this, because I always found this Eye of Sauron thing kind of weird. So I did a bit of Googling, Chris. And it turns out Peter Jackson just kind of misread the book. Because, and he's admitted this, it's worth noting, that isn't me throwing shade, he said as much. Basically, in the book, let me pull up the information I got. Because I don't want to get it wrong either, because we're talking about, like, Lord of the Rings fans are going to murder me if I'm not careful. 1 second. You know what I mean, though, don't you? Here we go. So, the appearance of Sauron as either a person, as we see him at the beginning of the movie, as a big giant person with the ring on his finger, or a massive eye on top of a tower, were largely inventions of the movie. Sauron never appears directly in the Lord of the Rings novels, and most of his dealings occur indirectly via his underlings. Descriptions of what he looks like remain vague. At one point, Gollum, who was tortured by him, mentions that he has 4 fingers on a black hand, suggesting that he has a physical body. But in the Silmarillion, he's described as a shape changer who appears who has appeared as various animal forms over the ages, and once even with sort of fair elvish features. Tolkien separately described his final years as a man of more than human stature. An image of malice and hatred made visible, and you could argue that inspired the vision of the big sort of knighted figure in the early bits of this movie. But actually, here we go. Sauron's depiction as a heavy armor-clad... I've lost Chris. Hello.
Not sure what happened there.
1 second. Because you're not on my headphones for some reason. There you go. Hello.
I'm not sure what happened there. You cut out after descriptions remain vague.
Oh, well, I did do a bunch of other talking. I'll repeat that, and then I'll cut around it when we do the final.
Yeah. Have you made a note of the timestamp?
Yeah. So his descriptions remain very vague. At one point, Gollum, who was tortured by Sauron, mentions that he has 4 fingers on a black hand, suggesting that he has physical form. But he's also been described as a shape changer in the Silmarillion. And that he'd taken the form of various animals over the years, and once that he'd even had fair elfish features. Tolkien even described him in his final years as a man of more human stature, an image of malice and hatred made visible. Who gave off intense heat and had a dreadful presence and daunting eyes. But his description's always been sort of vague. So in the movie, they had to figure out what he would look like. Now, his depiction as a heavy armor-clad giant in the movie is actually based on the descriptions of a character called Morgoth, who was apparently the first Dark Lord of the Middle Age, and Sauron's former superior. But he was defeated at the end of the First Age, apparently. But the movie's visual of the eye on the tower is actually sort of a misinterpretation on Jackson's part. Because in the books, there are lots of references to the Eye of Sauron, but this is generally been interpreted as him being a metaphor for his ability to see what's going on through magic, through a network of spies. The Eye of Sauron is a bit like referring to the Eye of Big Brother.
Oh, right.
But Jackson kind of took that literally and made him an eye. Now,
I love the idea of like Tolkien, in another life or whatever, watching these movies and being like so pleased with how the pacing and how much they've got right, and then this giant eye appearing on screen, and Tolkien just being like, "No, for fuck's sake."
yeah. So, it's more of a metaphor for Sauron's watchful presence than an actual physical manifestation. Peter Jackson has later admitted that he may have misread that particular element. It's interesting, isn't it? That like it's so easy to sort of like, especially because Tolkien's work is so dense, to sort of like misinterpret that. Sauron's depiction in this movie is very distinct and specific to the movie, and is not quite the same in the book. In fact, Sauron, his presence in the book is usually felt according to both this and my memory of it, is more like, he's out there leading all of this, but you ain't getting anywhere near him. Like, that's not really the point. He's not... Sauron himself isn't the point. It's what Sauron represents.
Yeah, completely.
So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I can't remember how we got onto that, because that was a long bit, but it's also snipped a bit out of my trivia, so we're good.
Cool. I'll make a nonsensical point before asking a more valid question. Sometimes people fancy very specifically a character and not the actor. So Jack Sparrow is a big example. There are lots of people out there that fancy Jack Sparrow, but don't necessarily fancy Johnny Depp or think Johnny Depp is attractive. They specifically think Jack Sparrow is attractive.
Sure.
I feel that way about Aragon. Like, I've paused over Aragon in sort of skipping on Amazon, and I've gone, that right there is a beautiful man. And I've checked out Viggo Mortensen, also a very good-looking man and a very good actor, no doubt. But there's something about Aragon, baby. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. So I've met him twice, Viggo Mortensen. Once when they were promoting Green Book, and then once completely unrelated to anything else. It was just an absolute chance meeting. And both times, he was a very reserved, stoic fella that had a lot of presence about him. So I do think the man has brought a lot of that to it, but I do get it. Look, he's got the long hair. He's sort of soft.
It's the long hair and the beard, isn't it?
Yeah, he's got a real look to him in this that really works for him, I think. He's the lead in a movie called Captain Fantastic, which is an absolutely incredible indie film from a few years ago that I've seen twice now, and just it gets better every time I see it. It's absolutely fun. It's a fantastic movie, and he's great in it. And it was so funny because when I met him the very first time, I'd not long before discovered Captain Fantastic, which is a bit of an under the radar movie he made, but a very good one. So I was really excited to be like, "Oh, I loved you in Captain Fantastic," expecting him to be like, "Oh, cool, you watched that." You're the guy. You're the one person who saw my dumb movie. It's not a dumb movie. It's a really clever, really brilliant story about a family. It's beautiful. It's really well done. But he basically just went, "Thank you," and that was it. I was like, "You are too cool for school, my friend. I love it." He's just, he's very humble, very sort of reserved fella.
That's awesome. Let's talk about specific scenes and sequences. I know you want to talk about the pub. Before we do that, I'll say that one of my favourite sequences and kind of sections of this film is obviously Thou Shalt Not Pass. The power in Ian McKellen's performance. Yes. You really feel the might of Gandalf, and there's not a lot of opportunities in this. He gets away on the eagle using cunningness and using cleverness. He's got a twinkle on his eye and he's setting off fireworks in The Hobbit. There's not many opportunities in this film for you to go, this is why, everyone's, this is why Gandalf is considered the most amazing wizard and one of the most powerful. And you really kind of see it and feel it in Thou Shalt Not Pass. And a lot of it is like literally that line and Ian McKellen's performance and the resilience of Gandalf in that scene. Can
I add something as well that I didn't remember? I didn't remember that he essentially says it twice. Because he sort of says, "You will not pass," in like a really sort of calm voice, and almost to himself. Like he's convincing himself he has the power to stop this from happening. And then he delivers the almighty, "You shall not pass."
Did you watch it then? The first time he said it, were you like, "That's not my memory of this"?
Yeah, right.
I've been remembering that wrong.
Yeah, correct. But when I looked at it, I went, actually, that's why the second delivery is so powerful. It's the shift from the one where he doesn't seem as confident. It seems like he's almost convincing himself that's what he needs to do to go from that to the absolute just balls to the wall delivery he gives the final one that comes with all this confidence and power, and it's all just in his voice and acting and the movement that comes along with it. Man, did Ian McKellen nail it.
It's amazing.
Wow.
And what I then also particularly love is the sequence after where the hobbits are destroyed. And you just realise just how much Gandalf meant to them in that moment. and you realise how important he is to the hobbits, to the Shire, all of that stuff. And then I'm just trying to find it to see who it is that is just like, right, let's move on. And then someone else is like, oh yeah, here we go. So it's Aragorn says to Legolas, get them up. And Legolas is like, give them a moment for... Oh no, Boromir is like, give them a moment for pity's sake. But Aragorn is aware of the urgency. And in that moment, acting like a king, there's so much... In that sequence,
yes,
you know, between Gandalf fighting him and the immediate aftermath, there's so much character stuff put into narrative moments, and it's you know, a lot of it is subtle. Frodo's reaction going off, the beauty of, like, after being in these mines and stuff, the beauties of these kind of white hills and stuff that they come out at. Like, that's probably my favorite sequence in the film. You were going to say about the pub attack scene?
Yeah, it's the
sequence
favorites? Just before they get to the pub. It's the Ringwraith sequence. It's still I think it's one of the moments where I really started to fall in love with the film when I first saw it. You know, because I went from the start of the podcast, I was explaining. You know, I was kind of like a reluctant viewer of the movie, and you know, the Shire stuff. I'm like, okay, I kind of like these characters. They're kind of fun. But, you know, and then we get to the moment I think I knew, oh, no, this is something really special, is the Ringwraith sequence. So for those who don't recall, I'm sure you do because it's so iconic now, when they're traveling between the Shire and that sort of pub they're going to meet Gandalf at, they hear someone coming, they hide under this log, and it's a Ringwraith. And everything about the filmmaking from that moment when the Ringwraith arrives to when they get away from the Ringwraith is some of the most intelligent, incredible filmmaking, like just in terms of the choices of shots, the editing, the music, the way it builds tension, that the performances all obviously do a really good job of selling it too. But it's things like the shot when, so I think it's like Merry or Pippin turns around and looks through a small gap under the tree, and you see the horse's hooves first, and then you see the foot of the Ringwraith, and then you see the angle they get when the Ringwraith leans over the log, and it's Frodo's terrified face with the Ringwraith looming, but you know it's not looking directly at him, but all it's going to have to do is turn slightly and they're caught, and then all the bugs come up from everywhere because the bugs are so terrified of this creature. They're all disturbed and coming up to the surface. Oh, Jesus Christ. Everything about that moment. Right through to their escape from that, and then their eventual capture again, where Frodo wears the ring, and we see what really the Ringwraiths look like through that sort of weird dimension that Frodo goes to when he puts on the ring. Just absolutely incredible. Just top tier filmmaking. Actually, you know what? I've just realised. I think is that after the pub or before? No, that one's before. Then there's another encounter with the Ringwraiths after, but then they have Aragorn with them who helps them out. But the one I'm talking about around the log is before they get to the pub. It's just incredible. It's just an amazing scene.
It's a good example. The direction, which we've also not really touched upon, but the direction in this film, is phenomenal and adds so much. Like and whether camera positioning was particularly Jackson or not, we obviously don't know. He obviously had a amazing director of photography, etc.
Yeah, exactly. But the DOP probably did his work as well. Yeah. But yeah, 100%. But you presume it's from Jackson's storyboards and choices. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, who's to say for sure who gets the credit? But things like, the low angle on that as they're hiding and really feeling the might and the size difference between them and the hobbits is really powerful. The one that really got me is the decision in the scene where Gandalf is sort of following and interacting with Bilbo in the home in the Shire, and sort of when we look at the map, we're almost looking at it from Gandalf's POV, and the decision of the way the camera moves, it's like it's Gandalf's eye, and we're seeing what he's seeing, and we're sort of getting let into what he's noticing, but we can't hear his thoughts and stuff. And there's a lot of kind of moments in this film which feel like they're lit, like the camera is inside the character's eye. And it's really powerful and effective.
Yeah, I think there's so many choices that really add to each sequence. Like the sequence on the staircase that's collapsing when they're escaping the mines of Moria. it's a tense sequence on paper because they get to the stairs, and every single time they seem to get someone across, it crumbles a bit, and the next person has a harder job, has further to travel, jumping across. So on paper, what's physically happening in that scene? They're also having to make the jump while there's arrows being fired at them as well, just to give them some extra tension, and the Balrog down the fucking road catching up to them too. So there's tons of tension just in what's chosen in that scene, physically, storytelling wise, what's actually occurring narratively. But I think, again, it's what you said about like what Jackson's doing or what his team are doing creatively, visually, is enhancing it at every point. It's adding a lot to it. That scene gets way more tense when you see the angles that are chosen. That shot from down below where you see it cracking, but you can still see them at the top, gives a real sense of the scale of it, which adds to that tension. The way that they go for the close-ups for the panic on their faces and then pull back out, like, shows you how much that the characters are sort of struggling to. Every time it crumbles a bit more, you see the increased panic on their faces. Just everything they're choosing to show you through the editing, through the shots, just really enhance what's cool about that action scene. And it's a small scene. The premise is they're trying to go down a staircase. There's a big gap in the staircase. They got to jump it, and it crumbles away as they're doing it. That on its own, is okay, but then you add the extra elements I already talked about visually, but also narratively. It just all comes together really well. So it's about what's so great about this film is how his choices or the production team's choices enhance what's already on the page instead of just delivering it. And there are lots of movies we've reviewed where we know what's on the page is good and that is enough. But this is one of those moments where it's all very clearly being elevated by extraordinary filmmaking. Like, just outright incredible choices by a very talented director.
So do you... Because uniquely for us, we've not really critiqued in a kind of negative way, or what are there? If you're forced to give a criticism of this movie, what jumps to your mind?
Yeah, I think I do think there are. I think there are some things that are not maybe established as well as they could. We have covered the two biggest ones, I think, already, which is one, I don't think the Ring of Power is set up enough. The One Ring to rule them all is its powers are vague. I think Sauron as a force is talked about with a lot of fear, and we get slow hints as to what the world might look like under him. But maybe they could be more. And then the other big one is obviously the characterization of Merry, Pip, Legolas, and Gimli,
Gimli.
That could use some more work. But to be fair, I think that's a choice to give us the focus that we do get on the other one, so I don't really mind that one so much. Otherwise, I mean, I can't really. It's pretty damn close to a perfect movie. It really is. I wasn't expecting to say that. I thought we were going to have some qualms without how it played out. I thought we were going to have some qualms about the length, some qualms about the pacing. But nah, they sussed it out, didn't they? They really did. I don't know. Do you have anything particularly you didn't think worked?
No, I'd agree. For me, the big one, as we've discussed, was the character stuff with the characters you've mentioned. But I, like you, I think it is a deliberate choice, and my memory is that we get more Legolas, for example. He doesn't actually have a lot to do in this movie, but my memory is that we get more of him in later movies. Uh-huh. So and the Sam one was a big observation for me, but again, I think that might be deliberate. It definitely feels like, and this isn't a criticism, but I could see someone saying it as a criticism. It's just not for me personally. Definitely feels like part one. There's a lot of setup in this film, and I think if it, as discussed earlier, if it meanders anywhere, it meanders around the kind of second elf bit with the husband and wife. But I, like you, these are minor criticisms compared to actually how beautifully it's shot, how clever some of the structure and narrative choices are, and how much weight is given to things that other filmmakers and creators wouldn't have given weight to that make the film more beneficial. So specifically, as we've talked about, that end sequence being so much about character. and about how the characters are feeling. And it is a great. At the end of the day, for the reason for me saying it feels like a lot of setup and part one isn't a criticism is because it is. It is part one, and what you want from part one is you want to end the film going, that's that part of the story complete. I feel like that story has been completed, and now I'm fucking excited about what happens next. And I think you definitely end, especially, and this is down to Tolkien, but especially the decision to kind of split up the gang and, like you say, have the weight of just Sam and Frodo on that quest on their own.
And not even leaving the other characters hanging. The other characters have a clear goal. They're going to go rescue Merry and Pippin.
Yeah, and I just go into the Two Towers thinking, how do those big trees come into this again? Because I remember there being trees, but I can't remember. There's a point in this film where they're cutting down trees, and I'm like, are they the same trees? Are the trees out for revenge for these trees getting cut down? I can't remember.
I think you're exactly right. I think the deforestation you saw in this movie is in Isengard, and I think the talking trees are Isengard. I think
wow!
I think
so
that's
I'm excited
exactly
to see
correct.
that.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure because Isengard is also where they're taking Merry and Pippin, and the big trees and Merry and Pippin interact. Is my memory. Because I've got one of the images that comes to my mind is a big walking, talking tree with Merry and Pippin sat on a branch on either side, talking to the tree as it wobbles through.
Right.
I've got that image in my brain somewhere, so I'm pretty sure that's coming. I think one point I want to add though to that is, yes, this is a lot of setup and payoff, but somehow, and I can't tell you how or why, so sorry, my media literacy here is going to let me down. I can't tell you how this works, but the movie does feel like a complete story somehow.
Yeah.
I didn't finish the movie feeling unsatisfied.
No,
I got all the ebbs and flows that I need of a movie.
I think it's as simple as the story is part one. The story is the story of the Fellowship, its reasoning for being created, what happens when it's created, and then at the end of the movie, it disbands. Do you know what I mean? So you feel complete because the film's called The Fellowship of the Ring, and we've explored the Fellowship of the Ring.
Right, and we've ended on Frodo realizing that's not going to work for him and going out on his own. So that feels complete as an arc. It feels like the arc of this movie was Frodo learning he has to go it alone. And that's
for the lols.
There's a satisfaction to the character stuff of this.
In terms of Frodo's decision for the lols, like I say, I'm all about the lols. I watched after watching. 4 hours is unfair because of the 27 minutes of credits. So after watching this 3.5 hour movie, I watched a 4-minute summary on YouTube because I just thought it'd be amusing to see how they condense it. And they condensed it very well, I have to say. But at the end, it says something like, Frodo decides to go on his own before he changes his mind and decides to let Samwise come with him. And I'm like, changes his mind? Like, Samwise is drowning. Like, he doesn't really give him a lot of choice. Like, he's not going to... It's a dark end to that movie if he just lets his friend drown.
Yes. Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? This movie ends with the characters all making big, bold choices, decisions. It's not just about Frodo choosing to go off on his own. It's about Sam choosing to follow. Aragorn choosing to let that happen, trusting in Frodo. Yeah. Aragorn, wise leader he may one day become, because he understands that Frodo has strength he can't even imagine. Frodo has already demonstrated more strength than Boromir, who is, a very capable being. I say being because obviously we're in a world of lots of different races. It's weird to use the word human, a very capable person, because obviously, we have elves and, orcs and hobbits. And
they refer to that group as man, don't they?
Yes, they do.
It's like elves, dwarves, man. Is it dwarves?
Yeah. Yeah, it's dwarves, man, elves, hobbits. We got the orcs, goblins, trolls, the whole shebang. Mm-hmm. So, but my point,
and they do, as you say, they do, because we talked about Boromir. They do make it clear, as you say, it's the ring corrupting Boromir. But what's so amazing is Frodo's not been fully corrupted.
Right, and it's even Aragorn realizing that and again, wise as he is, realizing that Frodo's probably right. he can think of himself as being bigger and stronger than Boromir mentally, and thinking like, Boromir couldn't handle it, but I probably could. But instead, he realizes that Frodo, having been the ring bearer this whole time, understands it better than he ever could, and Frodo feels like it's only a matter of time before he falls to it too. And keeping in mind that's really in line with his overall arc, which is he's living in the shadow of an ancestor that made a really, really shitty choice that's got them into this situation. This could have been over hundreds of years ago, like if he just dipped that ring in that lava, but he didn't have the strength to do it. So Aragorn both believes Frodo and understands Frodo is probably right, but also has the historic evidence that his family line are susceptible to that ring. So yeah, I think it's a really satisfying ending because of the character stuff all feeling like it has a good conclusion. All right, none of the plot is concluded. We've still got, orcs being manufactured, trees being torn down, big, huge sections of the world being murdered like we had in the Mines of Moria. We know Sauron's gaining power. We know Saruman's helping him. The world's still fucked. The realms of men, as they call them, the worlds of men, they don't have a proper leader. That's clearly been hinted that's kind of a chaotic situation, because they've not had a true leader to unite all the different sort of sects of man together. So you got Aragorn potentially, the elves hinting he has some destiny that's involved with that, but he's reluctant to take up that mantle because he knows there's a weakness in his family. It all just comes together perfectly. And so all those plot things are still up in the air. Of course they are. But the characters all come to really good, satisfying conclusions to their thoughts and feelings. And that's, I think, why, maybe that is the reason the movie feels like it has tons of closure, even though it doesn't when you actually analyze the story, which is all still open as hell. So, yeah.
So all of those feel like good summaries, Dan. Are we ready to triv it up?
Well, one last little note, if that's okay. I don't want to step on your triv it up, which was an excellent one, but I did want to just as well, very quickly, give some credit to the movie's funnier than I remember. We haven't really talked about that. There's some really great moments of comedy in this movie. My favourite will always be the rising music, the Fellowship are formed. They're all leading the way. Frodo's at the front. They're marching off on their big epic question. Gandalf, is Mordor left or right? It's left. Yes. And then they go left. It's great. I love that so much. One of my favourite bits in the whole movie. There's tons of really good comedy. Another bit I really like is Legolas like, elvish bread. One tiny bite will fill a man's belly for days. And then the two Pippin look at each other. He's like, I ate 3.
Yeah. And then he like, doesn't he fart or something?
Yeah.
Like, probably. I do not remember there being a fart gag. I like, gentlemen, we do not stop till nightfall. What about breakfast? You've already had it. We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast?
Yeah.
Arrogant turns and walks away. I don't think he knows about second breakfast, Pip. What about Ed Evans's? Luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, supper. He knows about them, doesn't he? I wouldn't count on it. And yes, I did look up the exact quote because it's brilliant. And a lot of the comedy from the Hobbits in general, whether it be Frodo, Merry, Pippin, Sam, a lot of the comedy from them, but that's absolutely fine. You need it, and at no point does sometimes in the Marvel movies you got a lot of comedy, but it feels like it shifts the tone, and it feels like it can be a bit jarring. It feels like there wouldn't actually be comedy and jokes in those situations. All feels very, very natural and very well written in here in terms of the comedy.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, all of it, but in particular, the comedy.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think as well, like I'm glad they got in some comedy for Gandalf, because in the Hobbit book, Gandalf's a very jovial, sort of trickstery wizard. He's a very he's a mischief maker. He comes in and he's pulls Bilbo out of his thing and he's like, see you later. Like he's quite tricksy. He's quite sort of like, I don't know, it's hard to describe what his character is, but his character is very sort of humorous. He doesn't take very much very seriously in that book. And I think getting a glimpse of that side of him at the start of this movie before we get to the more serious stuff is really good. Seeing him in Hobbiton at the beginning, setting off fireworks and joking around with Bilbo and Frodo is really good. And actually, a lot of the Bilbo Gandalf stuff at the beginning of this book is all really good. At the beginning of this movie, is really good also, because it really does do a good job of representing their relationship. And I think that's hard to achieve. But but him bumping his head and just silly little things like that are all really fun. And I think they do a really good job of making Gandalf not seem too serious at the beginning, but because they know he has to get quite serious towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought of one final joke example, and it's such like a classic joke, which is after falling down the hill and taking like a lot of toppling and a lot of damaging, and Mary saying, "I think I've broken something," and then pulling out a carrot that's just like snapped in half.
I forgot about that. That's a good one.
That's so good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Well,
big fan.
Now we've discussed that, Dan. Let's see if I can do it again. Let's trim it up.
We're gonna give you
good. Two
some
balls.
Trivia. Right.
Yours was great.
There's a lot of trivia, Chris.
Oh yeah, mate. After 30 seconds, assume I'm not listening, friend.
There's a lot. What I've done, I've divided it all up. So we've got all the specific trivia for this movie, which I will go through. I not say all. I've tried to cut it down, but man, if you look at trivia for this movie on any platform, it's just a fucking mountain of information. And what I've done is as well is separated out some general ones that are about the franchise, these three movies on the whole. I'm going to keep those to the side, and if at the end we've still got time, I'll do a couple of them. But they're mostly going to get interspersed throughout the second and third ones, which have less trivia that are specific to their movies for some reason. So. Yeah, bear with me, guys. I'm gonna try and make this work. So let's talk about how this movie became a thing. So Miramax was the first studio to express interest in Peter Jackson's interpretation. They'd spent $14 million to develop the project, but couldn't get it worked out. Basically, they needed Disney's approval for the go-ahead, and they couldn't figure out how much money to spend, how many movies to make it. Apparently, Harvey Weinstein. Oh, little disclaimer, as we did when we talked about Good Will Hunting. Obviously, Harvey Weinstein, boo. Big boo. But he's involved in the making of this movie, so I will talk about him. Unfortunately. There was a pitch at one point that he had that was 2 movies. With a production budget of no more than $180 million, but the head at Disney at the time rejected this proposal, thinking that Lord of the Rings would not translate well to film. This is Michael Eisner, and he thought there was a very limited audience for the fantasy genre. How wise he was. Glad they passed up on this cash cow. Fucking idiots. After Eisner's rejection, they basically had to let Peter Jackson shop it around because it was basically in development hell. Similar thing to what happened with Good Will Hunting, where it got to go into turnaround, where they were able to shop it to other studios. Jackson eventually went out and said that he was happy it didn't end up going through with Weinstein in the end. He described Weinstein as a big bully, a real bully, who ruled through mafia thuggery. Apparently at one point as well, Weinstein had reportedly wanted to take the project away from Jackson and give it to Quentin Tarantino, and apparently had forbidden Jackson from casting Mira Sorvino and Ashley Judd, who would later go on to accuse Weinstein of assault. And then Jackson apparently vowed he'd never work with Weinstein again. So that relationship ended quite sourly. And following that experience, Jackson was under the impression that no studio would agree to 3 movies, which is what he wanted to do. So he was forced to he was ready to settle, and he was pitching the project as 2 movies. But even then, most studios didn't want to take the risk, and that was until a pitch was set up with Robert Shave. Shea? Oh, I should put my glasses on. I've made this mistake before when we've done this, haven't we? Where are my glasses? They're not nearby. They should be. Where are they? I'm going to blame you for this.
While you look for them, I mean, it goes without saying, Quentin Tarantino directing Lord of the Rings is a mad idea. And whilst I'd want to see that sort of parallel universe of what that looked like, I'm glad that isn't like the version we got.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I think that's just an outright. I think that's a bad idea. I don't think. Yeah. I just don't think that would have worked personally. I don't think the styles mesh. Glasses aren't in reach, so I'm gonna have to give up with that and just hope that I don't make any more weird mistakes. So eventually, he set up a pitch with Robert Shea, which is this 2-movie pitch he had. He was the then president of New Line Cinema. His only quibble with the presentation is that it should really be 3 movies, which is what Peter Jackson wanted. So that worked out well. So there you go. That's how the movie kind of came to be.
I just can't imagine a world where this isn't, 3 movies. Like, it just seems mad to me. Any other option?
Yeah, I definitely think he'd have struggled to. Even he didn't even really get this movie contained into 3 movies. You could argue that once a movie reaches 3.5 hours, you've arguably got 2 movies in there. So yeah, it is funny to think that that at any point they thought this could be 2. It seems like folly, but whatever. The Tolkien estate was apparently reportedly never in favour of Jackson's adaptation, but seeing as Tolkien had signed the rights away in the 60s for just $15,000, which is about $100,000, which to be fair in modern day times is over $100,000, but it's still not very much at all. There was nothing the family could actually do to stop it. Apparently, Tolkien's grandson, Simon Tolkien, came out in support of the production, but was, according to some accounts, disowned by relatives as a result, although Simon's father, Christopher Tolkien, has later denied this. But yeah, that sounds not fun. Don't like that.
Absolutely.
So, famously, all 3 of these movies were filmed simultaneously, with a back-to-back-to-back shoot, across a record equaling. It's equaling I believe, the shoot for Apocalypse Now, I want to say. But it was 274 days across 16 months, which is just insane. So that's a lot. The production was so I can't imagine working on something that long. But then again, it's 3 movies, so actually it's quite efficient, really. If it had been 3 separate movies, it would have been a lot longer. Hobbiton itself, the set, was actually made a year before production began because they wanted it to be natural and lived in with real vegetable patches and, greenery growing up things and stuff. So they built it a year in advance. And then they had a greens department who regulated the length of the grass by having sheep eat it. So there you go. That's why Hobbiton looks... One of the reasons Hobbiton looks so good. The hobbits needed to appear about 3 to 4 feet tall, just tiny compared to the 7-foot Gandalf. This was often accomplished using forced perspective. Now, I could go into explanations of forced perspective, but it is basically things closer to the camera look bigger, so they would shoot them in a way where they were further back than you thought they were, so one look bigger than the other. The best example, if you can find it, there's a video out there of how they shot the scene of them in the carriage to the horse. And they're on this absolutely insane-looking contraption where the horse carriage is actually several feet long, and those 2 actors are not near each other at all. But then they angled the camera in a way that made them look like they were sat next to each other. But actually, Elijah Wood was several feet away from Gandalf the whole time, and they did it all practically in camera, not CGI, and it looks fucking ace. It really does.
Yeah, it looks amazing. Wow.
Yeah, it's great. If you can find that footage online, listeners, I would encourage you to do so because you will marvel at how they used forced perspective to make him look bigger. They also built 2 versions of Bag End, which is Bilbo's house. One that was, for Ian McKellen to walk around that was kind of like small, and then a bigger one for Bilbo and Frodo to go into where it made it look like they were small they were the things that were small and the house looked big. That's how they one of the ways they did that. Pretty clever idea. Apparently Ian McKellen, not Ian McGellen, I don't know who Ian McGellen is, was obviously way closer to the camera than the other actors, to give them the impression of that many different cases. Special prop sets were designed to help maintain the illusion in certain places where the camera had to move. That's like the example of the horse and carriage. Again, look it up; it's very cool. We've already covered that one, so I'll skip. I slipped that one into the main text But it's about Christopher Lee knowing a ton about Tolkien. Frequently visited the makeup department and often gave tips about the design of the various monsters. There you go. Orlando Bloom originally auditioned for the part of Faramir, a supporting character eventually played by David Wenham, who appears in the next two movies. But Bloom was called back and this was subsequently cast, but instead he was cast in the more prominent role of Legolas. Liam Neeson turned down the role of Boromir.
Oh, wow.
I think I would have enjoyed seeing that, but I think Sean Bean does a great job. So, apparently,
both would have been amazing, but Bean's. It's hard to imagine it being anyone but Bean.
Correct. Exactly right. Jake Gyllenhaal, and obviously just for the as well the addition to the Sean Bean dies in movies meme. Because if it had been Liam Neeson, that's one less on Sean Bean's list. Jake Gyllenhaal auditioned for the role of Frodo. Doesn't appear to have gotten it. And this one's a fun one, and we dodged a bullet, everyone. In an interview on the podcast WTF with Mark Maron, actor and comedian James Corden revealed that his very first movie audition was for the role of Samwise Gamgee. And I fucking thank the absolute... I don't believe in God, but if I did, I'd be thanking the Lord right now that didn't play out. I don't think Corden's a terrible actor necessarily, but he would have been fucking awful in that role. There's a sincerity to Sam that I don't think Corden is capable of doing.
Wow. Because I was thinking of actor James Corden, especially some of his earlier roles. I haven't seen it, but I think there's a lot of sincerity in Fat Friends, which is a TV show he did over here. But the sincerity thing, I can't think of a role where that particularly shines through of the roles I've seen him in.
No, because he usually plays a character that's putting on a front, right? He's playing a character that might eventually let something of his real self slip out, but he doesn't live in himself. He lives in a fictional version of himself. We all know those people. Those people who just sort of have a put on that they're constantly doing. He always plays characters that do that, and he draws comedy from that. And he's good at that because he's good at playing a character that's actually being very fake. And I think there's a reason for that personally. But I've never seen him actually play a character that is just sincere the whole time and is saying the things he really means. And I think it's very clear why he didn't get that role, even if he auditioned for it. Bullet dodged. I do not want to live in that universe. So Ian Holm, who played Bilbo Baggins, was actually in the BBC radio adaptation of The Lord of the Rings in 1981 as Frodo. So in his younger days, he played Frodo, and then when he got to his adult life, he got to play Bilbo. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, that is lovely. Definitely.
Prior to him being cast, though, Peter Jackson actually considered Sylvester McCoy to play Bilbo, which I actually think would have been brilliant. Ian Holm, obviously, we've already given him praise earlier in this podcast, but he's wonderful in that role, and I wouldn't cast it any other way. But I do think Sylvester McCoy would have also been very good.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
And obviously Jackson.
There's a real twinkle in McCoy's eye that would have been fun to see in his portrayal of Bilbo.
Yes, 100%. And I do also think as well that it seems to me that there's a reason Sylvester McCoy got to play Radagast the Brown in the Hobbit trilogy. It just feels like Jackson kind of being like, I didn't get to cast him last time. Let's make it work. Apparently, Sir Patrick Stewart was not just auditioned, but offered the role of Gandalf, but turned it down because he didn't like the script.
Oh, wow.
I mean, yeah. Mind melting, right?
Yeah.
Tom Baker was considered also for the role of Gandalf. But wait, what's that? But after his brief but praised cameo as a dying elven king in the movie Dungeons and Dragons. But apparently he turned it down, not willing to spend 16 months in New Zealand.
Fair enough. Makes sense.
Yeah. Sir Ian McKellen reportedly had not read the books when he was first approached by Peter Jackson to play Gandalf. It was Jackson's enthusiasm for the project that won him over, rather than the legacy of the books. So that's fun. I think that sounds right, though. If you've ever listened to the commentaries which I did in my youth. I've not done recently, but the commentaries that are on the extended versions, where it's the producers and writers and then Peter, like Pippa someone, and I can't remember who it is, but they basically talk through all the movies, how they made it. Jackson, his love for this world is so infectious in those commentaries. It's really quite something to behold. So as a recommendation, it's not often we recommend commentary tracks when we do this, but actually, if you can find those commentary tracks and even just like get the MP3s of them and like listen to them as you're like walking around like a podcast, they are really good to listen to.
How does Jackson get anything done? He's just, seemingly thinking about Lord of the Rings or the Beatles.
Yeah. He must be great at parties once, but then you bring him back for another party and he's like still talking about the Beatles and Lord of the Rings. You're like, shit, he's only got 2 topics.
I've got visions of him like watching the World Cup. Like, last year England got into the the finals of the Euros, and Peter Jackson's watching it with a bunch of British friends, and he's going, yeah, but I mean, a real battle is the Battle of the Five Armies, isn't it? And everyone's like, oh, Jesus, they're like, Harry Kane, what a great British person. Yeah, but John Lennon and Paul McCartney, though. I mean, you want to see 2 people pass the ball to each other smoothly. What about them, eh? Yeah, all right, Peter.
Oh, it's great, these HD cameras. Have you heard about the digital technology that I've helped work on that's restoring old footage? Yeah, Peter, it looks great. Shut up. So if we're talking about another dodged bullet, Chris, we talked about how much sort of charisma Viggo Mortensen carries in these movies. Yeah. Do you want to know the bullet we dodged, Chris?
Yes, I do.
Another person who auditioned for the role of Aragorn, was not offered to, but auditioned for, was Vin Diesel.
Oh wow! That would have been something.
There's so many things about that are wrong. I can't even express. Like, basically, Vin Diesel's agent must have just been putting him up for everything back then. That's the only explanation.
Thing is, though, Dan, you'd watch in a heartbeat, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but more out of morbid curiosity. I wouldn't want to live in the world where that's what happened, but I would if someone said, again, if we've got that old thing we talked about, the jokey, the Rick and Morty portal gun, I could pop to a world where that happened, watch it, and come back. My curiosity, it's not as high on my list as seeing the other version of Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz, but it's not far off it. I would really enjoy seeing that.
Yeah, especially if it's got all of them. If Corden is Samwise and Diesel is
arrogant,
yes. Like, let's see that movie. And instead of being filmed in New Zealand, it's filmed in Stockport, Manchester. Like the Pro Officer last week.
Yeah,
that would be the dream.
Yeah, I'd enjoy that. But we not the only sort of bullet we dodged with Aragorn, because I have no comment on this particular actor, but we were lucky to get Viggo because they cast someone else. Stuart Townsend had the role, and they were 4 days shooting with Stuart Townsend when Jackson changed his mind and decided they needed an older actor, that it wasn't working with Stuart Townsend. So they had to bring in Mortensen, who came in, midway through shooting, never having met Jackson, nor having read the books. And apparently it was the job of his 11-year-old son, Henry, who was the chief instigator in both convincing him to do it, but also bringing him up to speed on what it was he was doing. Wow. So, that's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible.
Absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good. Again, even more impressive that his performance is so goddamn good in this movie. Yeah. So the scripts were essentially... This is a weird one. This is another one of those movies where you think, like, fuck, it's lucky this came together the way it did. Because the scripts were constantly being rewritten on set as they were filming. They were laying out the train track in front of themselves as they were shooting the movies. And, they were being rewritten every day for the entire 16-month shoot. including input from actors and actresses who started to get very heavily involved in their characters. So I do think it's one of the things that helps bring this movie alive is they were able to, because the script wasn't like locked, it was fluid enough that they felt that like they could make changes as they went, and that's probably led to why some of the characters feel so well realized, because they got to like straighten it out with the actors' sort of input as they went. I think there's a world where that fails miserably and that the movie ends up a complete mess. But luckily, the right people in the right places, it all came together very neatly. And obviously, we got the movie we got, which is all very good. So yeah, I thought it was interesting. Because you'd think a movie like this would be like severely locked in. And I guess the broad strokes of the movie were. But it's interesting to think that the actual script, the scenes, what was exactly being said and was being shot was changing as they were going and kind of evolving naturally. So yeah. Nice. Gandalf's painful encounter with the ceiling beam in Bilbo's hobbit hole was not in the script. Ian McKellen banged his forehead against the beam accidentally, but carried on in character. Peter Jackson thought McKellen did such a good job acting through the mistake, he kept it in. So,
fair play.
This one's an interesting one. The cast often had to fly to remote shoot locations by helicopter. Sean Bean, who played Boromir, was afraid of flying and would only do it when absolutely necessary. When they were shooting the scenes of the Fellowship crossing the snowy mountains, he'd spend 2 hours every morning climbing the base of the mountain to get to the set near the top, leaving several hours before the rest of his cast, fully dressed as Boromir. The crew... The crew, who were just being flown up, would pass him on their helicopters, an hour or so into his journey.
Thinking they were stoned. Like, sorry, is that actually Boromir climbing? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah, Boromir's climbing. Yeah, but Sean Bean isn't Sean Bean, he's Boromir. The character is him playing Sean Bean. He's actually Boromir from the books.
Also, like, insurance-wise, someone presumably has to make that climb with him. So there's like a runner or a member of the production crew, the valiant
at least
runners and production crew team.
Yes,
where someone's job is like, yesterday when you dropped that light and cost us thousands of dollars and an hour's worth of time. Yeah, you're up the. Sorry. Hit my mic. We're good at this. You're up the mountain with Bean today. Like, oh, fucking hell.
Who's on bean duty?
Yeah.
Look, it's fair enough. He's scared of flying. Absolutely fine. I imagine though they had like.
I'm not.
I imagine they had locals and guides and stuff. Though it might not have been a member of the production crew because they probably had like people who knew the like not what am I thinking of escorts that were like Sherpas or that's not the right word, like local rangers or whatever, people who are familiar with the terrain and the safest routes and stuff. You wouldn't put in a production like this without hiring a couple of like locals to get you around, I guess. I would assume so. I don't know, but I'm just speculating. But yeah, I thought that was kind of funny.
Just spoilers. I assume no one's sort of watching this having not seen where it goes. But spoilers if you are. I've just loaded up to watch when we're done the trailer for The Two Towers, and Gandalf is in the trailer, which I think is a bit shitty because if you don't know the story, you wouldn't necessarily think Gandalf was coming back.
Yeah. I also don't like that.
Yeah. Anyway,
move.
Carry on.
Shitty move.
Yeah.
But I think he's also on the poster, so I think I think they just had to admit, Gandalf's back, baby.
Yeah, like they should have done with Justice League with Superman. Like just fucking put him on the poster, people.
Yeah. Although I would say less so because I think it's less of a guarantee that Gandalf's coming back. He's not the lead. He's not Superman. He could be playing the Obi-Wan role in this if you're unfamiliar with the text.
Yeah, and the trailers don't... Well, I've not seen the trailer yet, but they're sort of looking up at him, and he could be, a kind of, like you say, a forced ghost figure. Anyway, sorry, carry on with the...
Yeah, no worries. We'll get in there. So during the filming, most of the members of the Fellowship took up surfing in New Zealand in their spare time. I've heard various stories about this from the cast, on chat shows and stuff in the years since, and I remember hearing at one point that they were banned from doing it, but they did it anyway because the insurance company was getting a bit worried. And I think I figured out why the insurance company was getting worried. Because amongst the people that took up surfing was Viggo Mortensen, who wiped out really terribly one day and bruised the entire side of his face. The next day, makeup artists tried to mask the bruising and swelling, but it was so severe they were unsuccessful. So instead, Peter Jackson opted to film Mortensen from only one side for the entire scene.
Wow.
So during the Mines of Moria sequence, when they find the tomb, you'll notice that Aragorn is only shot from one side the entire time.
That's insane. Wow.
It's a good story. I enjoy that.
Beans sat there going, me walking up the mountain doesn't seem that risky now, does it?
Yeah. While his Sherpa is in the back fighting a mountain lion that tried to eat them earlier that day. So originally the narration in the prologue was actually Frodo, Elijah Wood. It was felt that... but it was felt that the information was kind of imparted had little real bearing on Frodo as a character. So they tried it again. They recorded it with Ian McKellen. But once again, it was felt that Gandalf wasn't the right character to say that stuff. Neither he nor Frodo were present for any of the events described in the prologue. So eventually, they realised they had Galadriel and brought in Cate Blanchett because they thought it kind of, one, emphasised the timelessness of the elves, but two, also, she has that brilliant ethereal voice. She's a wonderful way to start the movie, truthfully. Like, she's a very good narrator, and they're right. It does sort of help establish how ageless the elves are. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Liv Tyler accidentally... It's one of those choices. It's worth knowing, actually. It's one of those choices that when I first read that trivia, I was like, idiots. I don't know why they didn't land on that. Obviously, it's Galadriel. And then I thought about it and went, no, it's obviously Galadriel to me because I've seen the movie and know how well that works. I can see how they'd have been searching for a character to be the one to impart that knowledge. It makes perfect sense. Anyway, Liv Tyler apparently accidentally stabbed herself in the right thigh while filming the If You Want Him, Come and Claim Him scene. Now, I love that sequence. We haven't talked about it, but it's, Arwen comes in on her horse, grabs Frodo, who's on death's door, and rushes him to Rivendell with the ring wraiths in chase. And there's this great moment where she stops because they're basically there, and she says, come get him. And as they cross, she does some magic, and a big old wave takes him away. It's badass. It's awesome. Great way to introduce her as a character. And just a really cool scene. But yeah, less badass knowing that Liv Tyler accidentally stabbed herself in the thigh doing that. And apparently the footage of that is featured on the outtakes of the movie that are available on the DVD and Blu-ray. I haven't dug that out yet, but I'm definitely going to. That sounds hilarious. It'd be less hilarious if I knew she had long-term injuries from it, but knowing that it was just, that she's fine, that's quite fun.
Yeah.
When the dragon firework goes off at the party, the shriek heard by Billy Boyd is his actual screams. He was unaware at the time that the firework was really going to explode on set. He thought that it would be filmed separately and imposed over them in post. So his reaction is not at all scripted and is the take that ended up in the final cut, and I love it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And fair play to them, I guess. I suppose it's a bit cruel to not tell him, but it is a fun, genuine reaction.
Yeah, and I can't decide if it's that there was just a miscommunication, because the way it's phrased here is just that he wasn't aware. He was unaware at the time the firework was really going to explode. They don't say the crew kept it from him. So I couldn't figure out if it was like a prank, like a fun prank, to not tell him. To get that reaction and scare him. A bit like when they let Alan Rickman go on 2 instead of 3 to get his surprise at the end of Die Hard. Something like that, where it's going to be safe, but it will get a better performance. It's a bit cruel, but kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or did he just not understand? Did he just assume, or he got the wrong end of the stick from some production assistant? Is there really going to be a firework going off? Oh, I don't think so. Cool. It's hard to know what happened, but still really fun. And I went back and watched that scene after I read that, and it's pretty legit. It's a good reaction. It's great. Legolas's arrows in the final battle are computer generated. It would have been physically impossible for even the most gifted archer to fire off so many arrows so quickly. Now, there's an update to this trivia. that says, in the years following the film, multiple highly skilled archers have demonstrated that even Legolas's fastest arrow-firing rate across the whole trilogy can be replicated and maybe even improved upon. However, it's only possible with the quiver hung from the hip, not where Legolas has his quiver, which is on his back. You cannot do it from where he's got his quiver. So, and apparently another strategy is to forgo the sort of quiver entirely in favour of holding multiple arrows between the fingers of the draw hand and switching them in, which sounds complicated and difficult. But yeah, so what he's doing is practically impossible, unless you put the quiver, the you know, that whatever that holder is called that holds all of his arrows on the edge, on his clip, on his belt rather than on his back.
You know why I think they get away with it though? Because it's a movie, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't think it's to be honest with you, I read that trivia that way, and I went, it's fine. I'm
not saying anything about the trivia or the trivia choice. I'm just saying, I'm just stating facts, Dan. And my fact/opinion is, it's fine. It's a movie.
Agreed. 100% agreed. I think the purpose of that being in the trivia isn't so much that it's a problem, more just that it's an interesting observation that they managed to give him a skill that is like essentially physically impossible.
Yeah, which is cool. But further highlighting his archery skills.
Yes. So Sean Astin didn't go underwater to film that final scene at all. Filmed in a completely dry studio with fans making his cloak billow. Water effects were completely added in after by computer. I was convinced I'd be able to see that when I rewatched it. Couldn't. It's pretty seamless.
Interesting.
It's a good effect.
Fair play. Yeah. No, it is.
It's a good effect.
Nice.
We haven't really talked about it. The special effects in this movie are all very good. The only one that I think doesn't quite work, there's one shot, just one shot I didn't care for in the whole movie, and it's when they leave the small tomb where they've had that battle with that really big, like Gollum-like orc, and they go into like that huge hall and they're running through it. And there's just this really, really wide shot which does a great job of creating the scale, but they just look like they're on a green screen somewhere. Like their feet aren't moving at the same rate as the floor is shuffling under them. It looks really floaty and weird, and I didn't like it. But other than that, the movie is basically seamless. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you can feel a certain amount of CGI in that anything, and my memory, and I hope to be and look forward to being proven wrong. My memory is any time that there's groups in this, in Lord of the Rings, it feels like a CGI army, but I think you could level that same feeling at a lot of the Marvel movies, for example, even now. So it's a hard thing to pull off, I think.
Yes. We'll come to that. I've got some general trivia about how they achieve those effects, which I'm going to save for the later movies because they involve more big battles. But yes, there's some trivia about that too, because there's a special computer program invented for it. But we'll come to that. It's very interesting. So one of the indistinct words, that a little tease for next week's trivia. You going to come back now? We're professionals. See how I did that seamlessly, Chris. One of the indistinct words that Gandalf whispers to that sort of moth when he's trapped by Saruman is Gorthir. I think I'm pronouncing that right, or Gothir, which is basically the name of the eagle that later rescues him. So the premise is that he's telling that moth or butterfly, whatever that little creature, that little bird type creature that comes in is, to go get help, and it does. So there you go. I thought that was pretty cool. Sean Bean is absolutely convinced he was not in New Zealand on the day they shot the scene where the Fellowship departs from Rivendell. He doesn't remember filming it. He's pretty sure they added him digitally to the shot afterwards, but it seems like he was there. So I just thought that was fun. Right, this is maybe the best piece of trivia for me, because I didn't know about this. Now, I knew this actor was in this, but I didn't know the fan reaction. Bret McKenzie, of Flight of the Conchords, makes a silent cameo as an elf in this movie, in the Council of Elrond scene. His character was noticed by fans. And this is before Bret McKenzie was famous.
I was going to say, he presumably wasn't famous at this point.
No, but he was noticed by fans and was dubbed the name Figwit. which is Frodo is great. Oh, who is that? He was dubbed to be the most attractive elf, and his celebrity on the internet became such that Peter Jackson, who has informally accepted the use of the name for the character Figwit, made sure he brought him back in Return of the King and gave him 2 scripted dialogue scenes. I guess they were doing some second unit material after the first one came out, and were able to bring him back in time to film stuff for the third movie. So he gets 2 lines of dialogue. There was genuinely fan pages created for Figwit. And one of those fan pages described him as Legolas for the thinking woman.
Oh, wow.
It's incredible. And if you Google it, he doesn't look anything like Brett because I told Nadia that piece of trivia, and she was like, well, he was an elf. He's kind of got a hobbity look to him, right? Modern day Brett McKenzie does kind of match the style of a hobbit. He's got the kind of the curly hair and the beard. You could picture him being, alongside Merry, Pippin, and Frodo and stuff. But yeah, he played an elf, and he was indeed very handsome. I Googled him. I didn't notice him when I first watched the scene. Google what it looked like afterwards. Handsome man.
Handsome elf.
Handsome elf. So yeah, I just love that. And I think they might have brought him back for the Hobbit trilogy as well, and gave him more lines. I could be wrong about that, but yeah. So yeah, that's a fun one. I really enjoy that. According to Sean Austin in the DVD commentary, when Bilbo drops the ring before leaving Hobbiton, the floor was actually made magnetic to prevent the ring from bouncing, to give it like a real just hit the floor, to give it weight and to demonstrate the importance of the ring. So that's a fun idea. That's a really cool choice. Nice. The dummy of Sean Bean's body that's seen at the end, it was a silicon body, and it's the one they used to put in a boat and, send over a waterfall. Apparently it was so convincing that a crew member, while taking lunch orders, asked the other cast members if he'd want anything, assuming that it was Sean Bean asleep. That's pretty good.
That's very good.
Yeah. Okay, this one's pretty good as well. We're nearly at the end, by the way, if you're wondering. We've got a couple more left. In this movie's first theatrical release,
I'm doing that thing where I'm enjoying them all. If I react for 4 minutes to every one, it just elongates it by about half an hour. So
no, I got you. In the movie's first theatrical release, a story circulated that when Sam tells Frodo he's now the farthest he's ever been from home, there's a car visible in the background, top right-hand corner of the screen. Arguments ensued. Some said it was a trick of the smoke from the chimney that created the illusion of a car passing. Others said it was a glint of sunlight reflected in the windshield of a fast-moving vehicle. In the version of the movie that appeared on DVD, there is no car. You can freeze it frame by frame. No, only chimney smoke, and one frame there's like a small flash of light that could be a car, but not in any sense like confirmation. Peter Jackson said in the commentary track on the extended DVD that he looked at every frame on a computer and he has never seen anything resembling a car, and claims that it was nonsense. And certainly the original sighting remains unconfirmed. But in the documentary of the extended DVD version, the same damn DVD, editor John Gilbert does indeed say that there was a car in the background. They thought no one would notice it. They got rid of it for the DVD version. So in a subsequent magazine interview, Jackson agreed the car must have been there.
So is there an image of the car online?
No, I tried to find it. I couldn't find it. But that's the problem is, by the time the movie got to DVD, they'd fixed it. But it was the version that was shown in cinemas that had a car in the background.
Right.
So there's no imagery of that because, of course, that theatrical, those reels weren't, weren't what was shown in homes when it came to DVD. So yeah, it shall live in infamy. Just a couple more. Although in this movie it seems like only a few weeks or so have passed. In the original book, the time between Gandalf departing Bilbo's party his visit to Gondor and getting information about the ring, and then his return to Frodo and all that was literally something like 17 years.
Oh wow!
He goes off for years and comes back for Frodo much later on. This is shortened in the film to a few weeks at most, although apparently it was kept to 17 years in the animated version. Likewise, when Frodo leaves the Shire with the ring the same night that Gandalf visits him in the novels, he takes several weeks or maybe even months to sell his house and land, so to explain his departure from the Shire, so not to give away that he was off to go. He didn't want anyone to get wind that he was off with the ring. Obviously, that's not talked about in the movie. 1 second. No, that's last. That's the end of that. There's another bit, but it's like a different piece of trivia and a less interesting piece of trivia. Let's move on. So, last two bits. Peter Jackson is in the movie. He has a cameo as a belching peasant outside of the Prancing Pony Inn in Bree. And then the final bit of trivia, Chris. You thought you were going to escape it, Chris, but it is time for my world-famous segment. Are you ready, Chris? For Horses Exist. No! My bad horse impression. There are several horses used in this movie, Chris, and in these movies in general. Each week, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to get a horse. So, do you want to know what horse Arwen is riding when she saves Frodo in this movie?
Dan, I want you to give me the information, and I will lock it down for as long as it takes you to say it.
Mm-hmm. So, they used...
And retain that information.
It was an Andalusian horse that was used. There were 3 of them used for this particular film. The main horse that's in most of the primary shots was called Florian. There was a horse called Hero that was used for the high speed chases, and then there was a really lazy one called Odie that they just used for the scenes where it was stood there in the background. They got the laziest horse to do that, obviously. Nice. So yeah. Florian, nice. Hero, and Odie were the 3 horses, all Andalusians. 3 white Andalusians specifically, that gave Arwen her very distinct horse. Horses exist, everyone. We did it.
Horses exist. Boom.
Were you wondering how I was going to do Cars Exist this week, or did you think Horses Exist was the way?
No, I didn't give it any thought, but Horses Exist is a happy answer to that conundrum. I love it.
Cool. So there you go. We did it, Chris.
There we go. First Lord of the Rings movie. Now the question is, Dan, what am I picking next? I'm obviously picking the Two Towers. Let's not do a bit. Clearly, I'm going to pick the Two Towers, and we're going to see this bad boy through.
Except for the week after, I'm going to choose Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings.
Well, they did do an animated Return of the King. I think the same person. So yeah, I suppose you could pick that. I'd argue it would make you a tosser, but you could do that.
Did they do an animated one? I can't remember. My memory of it is that it just ended sort of suddenly, but maybe I just didn't see the sequel. But I'm not sure the sequel.
Well, there was definitely one. Hold on, there was definitely one listed when I looked it all up the other day. Yesterday. Hold on. Lord of the Rings film series, Middle-earth in film.
Oh, cancelled sequels. So yes, Bakshi's film was originally intended to be distributed as part 1, but the second movie never got made. It looks like.
Oh, what? So they cancelled the second one, but then did make there's a 1980 Return of the King animation film. So what? They just cancelled the second one? And...
No, it looks like it didn't happen at all. That must be a different thing.
But oh wait. Oh right, okay. So 19. That's weird. Yeah, it looks like it's. Yeah, it is different. It is different. I didn't know if it was connected because
Rankin Bass did a TV special.
Orson Bean played Bilbo in an animated version of The Hobbit and an animated version of The Return of the King.
Is the animated version of The Return of the King
things were connected?
Wait. Yes, Return of the King, 1980s. That is an unrelated Rankin Bass project by the look of it.
Right. No, it's not even Basque by the looks of it. It wasn't directed by him. Oh, Jules Bass.
Yeah, Rankin and Bass.
Right. Okay.
Jules Bass and Arthur Rankin. Yeah.
Right, I didn't realise they were two different people.
Yeah. Right, there you go. So that's because obviously Ralph Bakshi, who directed the animated Lord of the Rings movie, the one that got its sequel cancelled, and then we've got Rankin and Bass, who were doing. They were famous for doing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, like all those stop motion, like claymation Christmas specials. Looks like they went.
The conclusion comes because there were three, and there's basically one in the middle, not really connected. So that's where which is the one you're thinking of, the original first animated, the first story. So
okay, look, here we go. Yeah. This film is often mistaken to be a sequel to Ralph Bakshi's 1978 animated film, The Lord of the Rings, but no, it's not.
But it is instead a sequel to the 1977 film, The Hobbit.
Brilliant. That's chaos.
So basically, in 77 there was The Hobbit, and then different thing is The Lord of the Rings, and then they return to that world and those actors for the Return of the King. That's so confusing.
That is very confusing. There you go. So, fun times I had by all. I really enjoyed rewatching this. I think it's a great film. I was pleasantly surprised. I really thought, I genuinely thought I was going to enjoy it, but with the caveat of it's very long. I felt like I was going to feel some of the pace. I feel it dragging slightly. Wish it was tighter. Even though these are the definitive versions that make the most sense, I thought I was going to come in here and be like, I'm very torn because things make more sense in this version than the theatrical, but this one does drag. I don't think this one drags. I don't know why you'd ever watch the theatrical cut at this point. I think this is the definitive version of this movie. It works really well. It's an absolute masterclass in how to adapt the book. It's a shame the opposite is true of the sequels, although I don't believe that's Jackson's fault. But someday we'll get to those. I've got lots of thoughts on the Hobbit trilogy. Many things that are to do with studios getting greedy more than Jackson making bad choices. So yeah, we'll come to that when we come to that. And in the meantime, if you want to hear some thoughts on that, actually, a really good, great video essay online by Lindsay Ellis talks about both the reason those movies don't work, but also physically what happened and how the production went crazy, and then also there's a really great piece in it about how it negatively impacted New Zealand's economy and jobs and stuff, and had brilliant video series from Linda. I think it's 3 videos, but really worth watching. If you're interested in hearing why the Hobbit movies don't work now, and you want to hear someone way smarter than me talk about them, then I recommend you check out Lindsay Ellis's video. She's very, very good. So there you go.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Nice little recommend. We're doing the Two Towers next week. You can hear it now on Patreon if you want. It's going to be up a week early on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, I believe. You can check out our stuff there.
Yeah, and if you want to send us a message, you can do so. Twitter at Dan Doolan, at C Billingham, or at Nothing But Static without the G. So Nothing But Static will get to us. You can also mail us through the emails if you've got a big long thing you want to say and Twitter is restricting you to however many characters it restricts you to. Great, pop us an email, mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk, or of course you can go and find this video on YouTube and put your comments underneath that, which also helps the algorithm. And in fact, there are several ways you can do that. If you want to support us without giving actual hard-earned cash, I very much understand. We're definitely not worth it. No, we are worth it because we're professionals.
Full-on
professionals. Not my mic again. Burp, 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 burp. That's me. That's an impression of me.
No. Also a fair impression of me earlier on.
Jesus Christ. The other thing you could do if you want to support us is give a review on the audio platform of choice. That helps too. So it's a way you can support us without having to give money. You just go to iTunes or Spotify or any of those platforms, and you click like, and you give us a review, or you give us a heart, or whatever their system is. We threatened at one point to read some of the nice reviews for what people gave us on here, and we have yet to do that. So I need to actually think about that, because I think we said we'd do that last series and have failed to. So yeah, please keep leaving reviews. At some point I'm going to go through the reviews for Rewind Reviews on iTunes and other platforms. And so tell us your Rewind Review stories, like what movies are special to you, didn't hold up, do hold up. Yeah, talk about your Rewind Reviews in the comments. Way more interesting than reviewing our dumb little podcast. So please do that, and we'll at some point, I promise, I will read them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there we go, Dan. That is all the things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you everyone for listening.
Chris Billingham. Yep, thank you very much for listening. Sorry, I mean, I literally forgot how to. I was like, how do we wrap it? I'm Chris. I'll just jump to that. Very tired. It's been a long Lord of the Rings podcast, but very worth it. My name's Chris Billingham.
My name's Dan Dillon.
And this review has been Rewound.